Tej, we will dissect everything that New Day had to say later. We'll have a lot more to work with when we get to Seth and CM Punk too. But I want to start with the decision to turn the world title match at Saturday Night's main event this Saturday into a triple threat and what that means. I think what Punk and Seth said is a little more compelling, gives us a little material to talk about. But I want the world title to kind of be a headline here because I sort of get why they're doing it. I think there's some moving parts here that I'm curious about in terms of what they're going for with Gunther especially. So just tell me, what do you think they're up to by adding a third person to this match? What's going to be the reason for it? Because I was perfectly fine with one-on-one. I pretty much by default prefer one-on-one without a really good reason. Is there a good reason to add Priest to this?
I mean, it all just depends on what the end game is between Finn and Priest, and it definitely seems to indicate that another singles match between them is on the horizon, potentially a WrestleMania event, potentially at the Royal Rumble. But in any case, this seemed like an emphatic statement from WWE that their story is not over. I don't know how I feel about that, just because their last match really seemed to put a button on their feud and launch Damian Priest into a main eventer that was ready to kind of do his own thing. But, if this is how they want to return to that, then the storyline at least made sense. Finn's angling for a world title, the rationalization of he was always the bridesmaid, never the bride. He had a one-night shot with the Universal Championship. It will forever be relatable no matter how many times they go back to that well. So if this is how they get the two back into each other's orbits, it was probably the best way to do so. The other aspect of a triple threat that always jumps out to me is it's always a way to avoid one person not taking a clean loss.
Yeah.
And, with Gunther, his losses have been so few and far between that they've all meant something on his tenure in the main roster. So if this is a case of, it's time to get the World Heavyweight Championship off of Gunther, which would be a really interesting thing, because then what does he do as we come up to Mania season? Potentially a Cena match on the horizon. That could be really fun, but it seems to hint that they want something a little less cut and dry than Gunther standing victorious and Finn looking at the lights, or vice versa. Which makes me think, they have very specific places they want all three men to be, and I'm intrigued. I'm cautiously intrigued.
Yeah, no, I don't think they just did this because they don't want to do a clean finish, but I'm not ruling out. I mean, is there? Well, let me start with this as a follow-up to what you said, because I think you made some good points there. Is it possible that is it likely that Gunther loses his title, and if so, to which of the other two?
I don't know if it's likely.
Yeah.
Just because there's so much mileage to be had with Gunther as like the heel end boss, or if they plan on turning him face, a face Gunther as the champion, kind of upholding the in-ring standards of professional wrestling. Mm-hmm. It's a new twist on the idea of a fighting tweener champion that we haven't really seen in the sports entertainment era of WWE. So I don't think that there's a high probability that Gunther's losing the championship. I do think that we are on track to see Gunther continue to lose his composure and not be as dominating as he has been in the past. We've seen some very emphatic changes to his presentation in the past couple of weeks. He came out in a sweatshirt and jeans, which is something that he probably wouldn't have done his Intercontinental title reign. So I think that's in store. If I was a betting man, I still would say that Gunther walks away with the championship, but in a very different headspace than he is right now going into the match.
And in this transfer window and Netflix, they might want to keep the world title on Raw and the so-called undisputed title on SmackDown. And so it's crossing my mind, and I'm kind of, it's processing it during the show, and I'm kind of talking through it now. Is there some reason they want to get the belt off of Gunther so that they can move him to SmackDown without bringing the title with him? Because they're going to move some people to Raw from SmackDown, probably Roman Reigns. And so, but not Cody, but maybe Cody. I don't know. I've thought about different scenarios, and they have to keep SmackDown, the perception of SmackDown, plausibly They have to keep it plausible that people perceive SmackDown as still equal to Raw. They can't go, oh, it's a Netflix era. Hey, USA Network, great knowing you. SmackDown, great being the A brand during the Fox era, but it's pretty clear now who the number one brand is. So if they do load up the Netflix era Raw, they're going to need some people to fortify SmackDown. And crossing my mind, Gunther. So if Cody switches over, then Gunther can switch over and they can bring their titles with them. And so that's, obviously possible. Cody's not going to lose a title between now and then. So anyway, I'm throwing to you on that. Like, what are the moving parts for you in terms of titles and throwing that transfer window, the trade window into the equation, which is the first thing that came to mind when they added this. I'm thinking, okay, is this a sneaky way to get the belt off Gunther without him losing? And then Priest again or Balor as champion, and that frees up Gunther to leave Raw and go to SmackDown without the title. So your thoughts?
I think that the transfer window has definitely thrown a massive wrench into the equation as we enter 2025. The one thing that jumps out to me is that Cody's begun to make appearances on Raw again. And, outside of the bloodline, they've kind of been a bit stricter about who gets to make that jump. We've seen, Tiffany Stratton in the background of opposing shows hinting at a switch. We saw Dominic Mysterio on SmackDown, I believe it was, just in the background speaking to the GMs. And, in 2024, those little Easter eggs aren't done by accident. They're done to plant the seeds for something about to happen. And the fact that we've seen Cody on Raw definitely makes me think that, yeah, they are going to move Cody to Raw. He is by far the biggest babyface they've ever had. He gets bigger cheers than really anyone else on the roster right now when it comes to just pure love and adoration. And I think that would be a huge moment for an episode of Raw on Netflix. That, of course, then implies the World Heavyweight Championship moves to SmackDown. Does Gunther take it with him? I don't know. I don't know if it would make more sense to move the Judgment Day to SmackDown, given we saw the Dominic Mysterio tease, and SmackDown, for better or for worse, tends to be a bit more of a faction-heavy show at the moment with the tag division. Judgment Day, they're still the tag team championship. So how does that figure into the equation? I think that as we see the transfer window start to become a little more clear, we've got DIY as the tag champs on SmackDown. That will definitely inform who moves where in the coming weeks. And I think from there, we can kind of extrapolate what Saturday night's main event could lead to.
So in the chat, Sadler version 3 says, Balor is more likely than Priest by a 2-to-1 margin, 2% to 1%, because Gunther has a 97% chance to win. I don't know. I mean, I can't say that's not true. Because as we talk it through, one, yes, the triple threat there's a lot of reasons it could be happening. One of them is because they want to sneak the title off of Gunther without him losing. So certainly that comes to mind. And to me, it increases the chances a little more than 3% he's going to lose. But if Cody moves to Raw to be on Netflix, I think Gunther goes to SmackDown. They teased that on Friday. So that takes away the need for Gunther to lose the title to go to SmackDown, because you want one world title in each show. That's part of the transfer window or the trade. And Adam Pearce and Nick Aldis would, fans could perceive that as a fair trade, especially if Gunther is coming off a strong win. The more I talk this through, and I'm not ruling out Gunther stays on Raw for some reason, and they want to give the title to Priest or Balor to go to SmackDown, and there'll be enough other moves to even things out. The more then I think, okay, they're doing this because Gunther's a tweener, Balor's a heel, and Priest is a face, and they want that to be the dynamic. And so that gets me to the second part of what I want to talk about with Gunther, which is his character and the pros and cons of him being a tweener. And we'll do that after we introduce the show. This is the Wade Keller Pro Wrestling Post Show covering Raw on December 9th, 2024. I'm Wade Keller, the host of the show, the editor, publisher, and founder of the long-running Pro Wrestling Torch weekly newsletter, and the website, 25 years strong, PWTorch.com, and also the host of various podcasts, including the Wade Keller Podcast, which tomorrow will feature Todd Martin as my guest on the flagship. It'll be a simulcast of a good bit of this week's usual VIP exclusive Fix podcast. And also hosts the Wade Keller post shows, including live on YouTube. We stream live on YouTube after Raw, Dynamite, and SmackDown. every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So you can watch us on YouTube and watch it back on YouTube, but you can also listen on the podcast side of things, which is what the majority of you have done, because we've been up doing podcasts going on 15 years now for free through Blog Talk Radio initially, and now primarily through Spreaker and through our VIP site. And it is great to have all of you joining us, whether you're watching us on YouTube live or on delay, or listening to us on our podcast feed. Speaking of the podcast feed, just a quick plug. Search Wade Keller on your podcast app to subscribe. And when you search Wade Keller, you will see the red logo and the blue logo pop up. The red logo is the post-show feed, Raw, Dynamite, SmackDown, and some flashbacks. And the blue logo shows our main podcast feed. That includes the flagship, some interviews and interview flashbacks, our pay-per-view and PLE previews. We might have one later this week, by the way, for Saturday night's main event. I think the card is big enough to justify it. It just comes down to my schedule and that of some possible co-hosts. So be on the lookout for that later this week. Plus some really cool flashbacks from 5 and 10 years ago. So search Wade Keller, subscribe to both for free. You can subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Android and iOS apps on your phone, anywhere that you listen to podcasts. You can find us. You can also search PWTorch, by the way, after that, and subscribe to the PWTorch Daily Cast, which includes a different show each day of the week with different hosts, with different themes, NXT, AEW, the indie scene, the 90s past cast, on and on. Different show each day of the week, including our post-PLE and pay-per-view shows, which I think this weekend, we're still working things out. Saturday's main event's kind of a new format, but we're aiming to do a live post show, although I can't do it because I have to be at my son's musical Saturday night. And so I won't be, he's great in Beauty and the Beast. So I won't be able to watch Saturday's main event live, but I'll have some coverage of it over the weekend, one way or the other. So anyway, with that said, we're here to talk Raw, and you can participate in that by sending an email to wadekellerpodcast@gmail.com, wadekellerpodcast@gmail.com. You can also join us live in the chat if you're watching us live on YouTube. If you don't watch us live, that's where the email is good. You can watch Raw, Dynamite, SmackDown as it airs, send us a question, listen later to see if your email made the show. And if you're a VIP member or a Patreon supporter, we put up a link in my VIP website, TV Reports, and on Patreon, and letting you know how you can become a video caller, and you're invited to do that. My co-host tonight is a PWTorch.com contributor, Tej Narayanan. Tej, welcome to the show, and good to have you back in the co-host chair.
Glad to be here. As Wade so eloquently said, my name is Tej Narayanan. I am a PWTorch contributor. I write a column called the SmackDown Feud Trackers. Every week before Friday Night SmackDown on Friday, we recap every single feud going on over on the Blue brand. We offer some conjectures on where the programming could take each feud and each rivalry for the upcoming pay-per-view cycle. Please come check us out on pwtorch.com. We have a lot of fun, but today I'm here covering Raw, and I'm very, very excited to be back.
Excellent. Good to have you back. I know the chat room's happy to see you, because last time they were touting and celebrating your analysis and what you're bringing to these shows. So it's great to have you back, Tej. Okay, let's talk about Gunther's character and what they're doing with him, because he comes out, as you noted, in blue jeans and a navy blue pullover. Look nice, you might go to your relative's house for Christmas dressed like that, but it wasn't, super formal, or one might say pretentious. Although, with all due respect to Cody, not all suits are pretentious, right? But Gunther comes out, he gets booed, and he smiles. He doesn't throw a fit or get angry, just kind of smiles and soaks it up, lets it happen. And then he gets into it with Balor, and the crowd kind of is cheering Gunther, siding with him. So, understandably so, because Balor's certainly going for more heat with him in the Judgment Day, and they're siding against Balor and for Dom, of all people, when those two have, I wouldn't say spats, it's just Balor's being mean to Dom, and Dom sort of looking at him. So a lot of interesting moving parts, Tej, but I think most interesting is just what is the landing place for Gunther. And if they had stuck with Gunther against Balor, at least for one night, Gunther's going to be a babyface. They would have had that pretty clear cut. Instead, tonight, Priest gets added to the match, but he also added himself to the brawl. He came out to attack Judgment Day in a little bit of a save against Gunther because he was outnumbered, but then Gunther clotheslined Priest first chance he got. So they're obviously not at a point where Gunther is being pushed clearly as a baby face with some sort of, invisible turn that just sort of happened, as happened sort of with Damage Control, I guess. So I still don't know how I feel. I know how I should say that. I know how I feel. I want Gunther to stay heel longer, but I don't feel strongly about it because I will see it through. If they think it's better to position him as a babyface, and clearly they've got the next year for him mapped out in their mind. And so let's see it play out. I mean, I do have some confidence in this creative team. They're not going to turn Gunther like on a whim or to pop a rating, like, in the quote old days 15, 20 years ago when bookers are turning people just to quote pop a rating. That's not Paul Levesque's way. WWE isn't that desperate anymore to do that kind of thing. I'm intrigued with him being a babyface. It seems a little early, but if the lay of the land dictates that that's a good booking move, I think he'll handle it really well, and I think people will like him, and he can be the defender of the purity of the sport of pro wrestling and all that. So, Tej, just tell me your thoughts on this. We talked about it last week and the week before that. I mean, I don't think this. I will say this before I throw it to you. I don't think he's going to be a perpetual tweener. Is that hopeful on my part? Perhaps, because I just think tweeners leads to ambivalence by fans. I don't think you want fans going, I really like you this week, really don't like you next week. I think you want fans to have a strong opinion of them, of wrestlers, unless it's a transitionary phase, and that should be relatively short. I've made my case over and over. I think tweeners is something that in theory sounds fun and exciting, and in execution is stupid and never works, kind of like rankings that AEW found out. No matter how often it sounds fun and you try it, this doesn't work in pro wrestling. Certainly not the way WWE presents their product. So, Tej, over to you for your thoughts on Gunther's character and what they're doing with it and where they're heading.
See, what's really interesting about Gunther's character is the crux of his persona has never changed. He has always been the superstar that calls it like it is. And, if he says you are not measuring up, he will tell you you are not measuring up, regardless of even if you're his allies. We saw many, many times with Imperium. Now, when he was on top of the world as the Intercontinental Championship, that took on a very snide, snooty, elitist form. He was telling Chad Gable, you disappointed your daughter. I didn't do that. And yes, it was heelish because everybody loved Chad Gable at the time, but it was also real. Now, having lost the IC Championship, despite being the World Heavyweight Championship, Gunther's reign has not been as dominating as it previously was. And that's where this turn feels really, really unique to me. Gunther still calls it like it is, as we saw with Finn and as we saw with Priest. Remember, Priest was his enemy for a long time. He has no respect for Priest because Priest was engaging in Judgment Day shenanigans for years. But now, because he's lost, because he's losing his composure, he doesn't have the confidence in himself. He's calling it like it is, but he doesn't really know what's right and wrong anymore. He doesn't have that confidence in himself. So he's not as resolute in everything he's doing, and it's making him ever so slightly off his game. And that's why I think he hasn't turned yet. It doesn't make sense for him to turn. He's still the World Heavyweight Championship. He's still not on the back foot. He knows that Balor is in the wrong. He is in the right when it comes to, proper conduct and things like that. But eventually, and this is where I think his tenuous kind of alliance with Damian Priest is going to figure into the equation. He's going to be in a situation where he has to admit that fundamentally something about the way he perceived the situation was wrong. He's going to make a wrong call, and essentially he's going to unravel. I don't mean he's going to go insane, but I think that's going to be the spark, full-on babyface turn, where he's still going to uphold the principles he stands for, but all the elitism, the I'm better than you, is going to be gone. There's going to be a level of humility, a willingness to want to kind of work into the fabric of the WWE system rather than stand apart from it because he has no respect for the framework of sports entertainment, if that makes any sense.
Yes, and what you're doing is giving Paul Levesque and his team's booking a lot more credit than WWE fans are used to projecting onto what they're watching in progress. And you artfully stated it. You got into the layers of Gunther's personality, looked into it, took reality of his background, applied real life humanity to it, and laid out a path to get him to a point where there's a clear moment and impetus for him turning and changing that would then give the fans something other than an arbitrary reason to start cheering him. And that is what we've been wanting for a very long time from wrestling consistently with turns. And the pieces are there in place to do that. And that gets him past that. That achieves my goal, which is him being sort of a tweener, for lack of a better term. I would like to almost retire that term because I think he's more in transition than a character who's in between two places. But words matter, but it serves a purpose for now. But I think Tweener has a little bit of baggage. But he's on a journey towards change. We can kind of see where that might be triggered, and you laid it out well. And I hope that happens because that gets him to a babyface role definitively, and then we can just cheer him every week and have a good reason to do so instead of just sort of contextually cheering him or booing him because he's a mix of both good and bad, and it just depends on his opponent. I think that's a weak position to be in. I think you should, Seth is fighting. We'll get into that. Do you want to be cheered or booed only because your opponents conjure up stronger emotions from the fans than they do for you? I think that's a weak position to be in. I think you should be dictating the reaction of your opponent not dictating the reaction to you. Gunther's a big enough star and talented enough and a big personality. And I mean, he just carries himself as such a intellectual alpha. I want him to be in a position where he's cheered almost no matter who he's facing because people just respect him. What you laid out is a journey to kind of get there.
And the one tiny little point I'll disagree with you on when it comes to, being a tweener and the concept of you shouldn't be cheered because your opponent can get stronger emotions than you. Here's where I think Gunther always will have a strong fan base by leaning on objectivity, right? Mm-hmm. Because how you respond to objectivity and, without getting buried is with passion. We saw it with Cody and we're seeing it with Finn. It's passion in two very, very different forms. Gunther, he lays out the facts. Cody responds with, I understand, but this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. You can make fun of the results all you want, but you cannot knock down my pride. Finn Balor, of course, as we saw, a very, very different approach, but he basically just says, I don't care what you say. I don't care about what the facts are because I'm here right now. I am going to beat your ass, right? But fans will always respond to the reality of a situation and have a raised eyebrow towards delusion, whether babyface or heel. And as long as Gunther always comes from a place of this is the reality of the situation, and my only agenda is to plainly state, this is who you are not who you think you are, he will always have some respect because it's a very human thing. We always want the guys that say no BS, tell it like it is.
Right.
And, in the right framework, that could either be, either be commendable or that could get you cheered because you're an ass. And I think that's a very valuable asset that Gunther has, because fans have responded to him in both contexts. So I do think he has enough leeway to survive as a tweener for a while at least. And that's a very useful tool for WWE because he's malleable. You can put him in any feud. He can work very, very different dynamics.
So in that scenario, why would he ever be booed if he's consistent? And when he's opposite of a heel, fans admire him for speaking blunt truth that's rooted in a constitution that's consistent. Why would anyone boo that?
The same reason Kevin Owens is getting booed in his feud right now against Cody Rhodes over on the Blue Brand. Sometimes the objectivity of the situation, it misses the forest for the trees. There are things that matter more than you were wrong in this situation. As a yes, but I believe that what I did was right. I'm here, and the knows that I am here because I have only ever wanted to do right by them. That's where you lean a little bit more on, the strength of the babyface promo. But in my opinion, there's ways to get around that because I always go back to the Crown Jewel feud because Cody and Gunther were they're both champions, but they had such diametric views on what being a champion meant. And Gunther was right when he said, Cody, you do all these house shows. You're allying with every single person. You're not being a champion. You look at me. I do less work, and I have raised the World Heavyweight Championship far beyond what it's ever been. Can you say the same? And technically, that's true. At the time, Cody wasn't even defending his championship. He was allying with the Bloodline. But what did Cody respond with? He said, people know how much love I have for this business, right? Now, that's not disputing the facts situation, but there's things here that you've missed. And I think that if Gunther can keep working in that context, he could survive as both a heel and a face in certain situations.
Do you think if what you describe plays out the way that you've laid it out, and it makes sense, is that the best of the top choices of how to portray Gunther? I mean, do you want fans like Kevin Owens right now is getting booed? Do you next month should he be should he be feuding with, Solo Sikoa or something, and fans are cheering him because now he's using the same approach. He's in his own mind. He's got his rationalization, his framework. You can see why he thinks the way he does, and maybe he gets a little hot-headed sometimes. But now we're going to cheer him against Solo. But then 6 weeks later, 2 months later, the feud's over, and now he's going after Jay or whatever. Pick another babyface. Like, do you want to kind of jerk fans back and forth where they're liking him, disliking him, liking him? Because to me, that's sort of like an out-of-town sports team. I boo them when they play my team, but I cheer them if as a Viking fan, I want the Lions to lose, but if Lions are playing the Packers, I want the Lions to beat the Packers because I hate the Packers more than I hate the Lions. So, to me, wrestling is able to avoid that, and you can just get fans behind Gunther. I want to buy his T-shirt, and I want to wear it every month, not just half the months when he's opposite of somebody I like. So to me, even if you can pull it off with a character like Gunther or any other character, should you? Why are we working so hard to get away from just, there's people who are consistent and we like them, and there's people who are consistent and we don't, and then every once in a while something happens where they switch and we see why, and now we're giving them the opposite reaction. Like maybe it's happening with Dom.
I completely get where you're coming from, and that's, I think, me coming from, I've gotten back into wrestling in the post-kayfabe era where I think audiences have a little bit more of a capacity for a tweener-esque role. So to me, that doesn't seem as kind of out of left field, but I definitely do see where you're coming from. But let me ask you this. How do you qualify the best use of a character versus just a good use or a use that makes sense?
Well, I'll just step back to the big picture, which is I think pro wrestling's like the NHL. You want to go to a game and you want to cheer for one uniform to check the other opponent hard into the boards, and you want to cheer. If there's a fight, you cheer for a uniform. On the scoreboard, you cheer for a uniform. If there's good people on your team, you focus on that. If there's bad people on your team who take cheap shots, you rationalize it. The other team has good people. You don't think they're as good as your good people, and their bad people are worse. And you yell and you scream for the color of the uniform that you have chosen to follow due to regional or family history, or because a player caught your attention when you were young and you just stuck with the team. Pro wrestling works like that. To me, Tweeners is like, hey, there's a game I could go to with the team I love against a team I don't like, but you know what? Let me drive 100 miles and go watch two teams that I don't have strong feelings for, but they're really skilled and they're really nuanced and they're really interesting people, but I'm sort of don't really care that much who wins. You're not going to do that. You're going to not pay as much money for it. So to me, the best, getting to your question full circle, best use of a character in pro wrestling is getting a strong crowd reaction. As at NXT on Saturday night for Deadline, crowds going nuts for Trick Williams, kids, families, adults. They want to see him win. So, Ridge Holland comes out, fans are booing him, and he just leans on the top rope and he just laughs in their face. Like, you can boo me, but I'm going to walk out with a championship, and you're going to be sad tonight, and I'm going to love it. Every one of you that I'm looking at who are booing me, you're going to be sad tonight. I'm going to be rich and famous and happy and successful. Screw you. That led to the crowd reacting. That's pro wrestling. Why complicate that? No one's forcing you to. Keep it simple. Pick out wrestlers that people like, traits that they like in those wrestlers, and amplify those and consistently frame them as something worthy of cheering. I think wrestling, when I first started going to wrestling, people didn't think wrestling was real. They just were pulled into it more readily because pro wrestling promoters and wrestlers were still kind of insecure about, well, if they don't think it's real, then they won't go. So they worked really, really hard to make it as real as possible, which made it very possible to lose yourself in the moment and get drawn in and pulled in emotionally into this fictional world. Almost everybody in 1978 and 1983, before Vince McMahon said it's fake or whatever, or predetermined, it was open about it. They all knew. I mean, when I first started watching wrestling, my mom's like, the guys at work say maybe, Wade, it's not on the up and up. And I'm like, oh, I know it, but I don't care. And I was 9. I mean, let's not, this whole thing that people think 30 years ago, everyone thought it was real, or 50 years ago, people thought it was real. Nobody thought it was real. I mean, not nobody. Some people thought it was. People who pretended they thought it was real were pretending, and it was willful denial, and they deep down knew. with some exception because they were young or just frankly not like really sophisticated people. They just didn't think that hard about it. So my argument isn't, well, now that people know we have to change the formula. No, the formula should be make an immersive world where there's something to cheer, something to boo, titles that matter, and entertaining athletes and bombastic personalities. That's my philosophy. I think that's what draws. That's why WWE's drawing right now, because people are into Cody, they're into Sammy, they're into Jay. They want to see the bloodline lose. Don't mess with that, or your 10,000 audiences are going to go down to 4 in 2 years. I mean, I do think that. I think you'll draw fewer fans if it becomes about wanting to. And I went on this rant last week, so sorry to everybody. But but. If Paul Levesque's like, I want to make my mark in the business and be more sophisticated, then good, but you're going to lose 60% of your fan base, because a lot of people just want to go and they want to cheer for people they really like. They don't want to sit here and go, God, am I going to cheer for Dom this week? Am I going to cheer for Seth this week? Am I going to cheer for Gunther this week? If the whole roster is full of people, or half the roster is full of people, that you have to kind of think hard about the pros and cons of whether you want to cheer them, people are going to stay at home. That's not what they want to go to wrestling for. Azan White says, Tweener's muddy the water. Al Larcher counters, the audience is ready for tweener roles. Depth is key. Al, you are ready for a tweener role. A lot of fans are. I'm not denying that. I would enjoy it. Like, this is not me pushing back on something that I wouldn't enjoy. I'm pushing back on something I'd enjoy, but I think it's bad for business if they decide to outsmart themselves and break from the formula that works. So remember, and I haven't said this in a while, it's not all about you. If you want tweeners and you think you and your buddies are ready for tweeners, step back and go, if you have $1 million and you can turn it into 10 million, do you want to put that million in a company that says, let's mess with this formula and do tweeners and ambiguity, and let's see if this works because we want praise for changing the industry? Or there's another company that's saying, let's stick with the tried and true formula, kind of like the NHL, where people show up, have a couple beers, and they cheer for one side to beat the crap out of the other because they like one side better than the other. I want to turn my million into 10 million with a company that's going to draw those emotions out of fans. And if you want to win an Emmy Award and you don't care about making money and drawing big crowds, then fine. Go watch that other company. I'll watch it too, but I'm not going to invest in it. There's my rant, Tej.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think I have anything else to add to that point. I'm out here taking my notes.
All right, Junaid says, I haven't read what Junaid said, but I'm always interested. How about this, Wade? Raw is full of nuanced shades of great characters, making great points. SmackDown's full of more traditional babyface heels with appropriate sophistication. Netflix, if you're watching, tell Paul Levesque, you better not. Because they're going to be smaller audiences and a smaller viewership than they could get. You can't do 2 formulas at once. I mean, it's just what... Yeah. Anyway, and
I feel like a lot of people thought that's where I feel like a lot of people thought that there was going to be a much bigger shift following the move to Peacock, because I saw a lot of arguments like, oh, the back catalog is so much more accessible. All the programming's all in the same place. People are going to treat this like it's peak TV. They're going to watch everything. They can track, they can track a wrestler's character arc so much cleaner, so you can get more nuanced. But like you said, Wade, it kind of. That's not what this medium is about fundamentally. And I just found that interesting. It feels like a lot of people are expecting the same changes as we move to Netflix, and I don't think...
No. I said last week on the SmackDown.
I don't think...
I said last week, Netflix going to be like the first SmackDown. There are going to be a couple different camera angles. They're going to be in this awesome Intuit arena. Like, watch a YouTube video on that place. It's insane how cool and crazy, wild...
I've been there. It is by far the nicest stadium I've ever been inside.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah. Well, I mean, it feels like a tourist attraction. I mean, it's like next level. And was it Steve Ballmer? Is that his name? The owner of the Clippers? Or am I getting his name?
I have no idea.
He's so excited about this place. He's just like, I mean, his enthusiasm is contagious I don't know a lot about him. So maybe he's a horrible person, but in the video I watched at that arena, I was like, I got to see what this is all about. He's like, oh, let me show you this place. I'm so excited. It's fun to see billionaires, just mark out, so to speak. So it's going to be shiny and glossy and exciting when they're on Netflix. They're going to have celebrities, and they're going to have, some new camera angles and stuff. But this is what I would say. If they thought they could make Raw better and bigger and more exciting and bolder, they'd have done it 6 months ago or 18 months ago or 2.5 years ago. They've been doing this a long time. It's not like they were holding back on some great idea for a Monday Night Live wrestling show to really be great. We're going to wait till we're on a streaming service to do it. That's I can promise you that was not a thought on anyone's mind over the last, 5, 10, 20 years. And also, Netflix is not a virtual reality show or augmented reality show, or you put on some headset. It doesn't teleport you, beam me up, Scotty, to the arena. Like, you're still just watching on the same screen. It's no different. It just is cheaper to get than cable. And more people have it than cable now, and it's international. But if it's different, it's not going to be all that different. And there's absolutely zero reason to fundamentally change the WWE product, given how successful it is right now. Because you're switching from watching on a same ratio TV screen in 4K as you were before. It's just, I don't get it. So if they prove me wrong and they do something better for worse and they radically change it, fine. But as Paul Levesque said at a post-event press conference a couple months ago, we're showing up with the same people, the same directors, same cameras. We're sending the show to Netflix. They're not coming to us and filming our events. We are just changing the satellite feed. It's not going to be that different. They'll put their best foot forward, of course. With
absolutely, shows are going to be loaded up on the road to WrestleMania.
But I mean, by June, Netflix Raw is going to be the same as USA Network Raw. I mean, I don't think there'll be anything different about the mid-June Raw if they had stayed on USA or moved to Fox or whatever. It's a 2-3 hour wrestling show on a TV screen, and they're doing the best they can always with ebb and flow based on the season. Okay, so I want to go to L. Archer for a second because he had a couple posts here about the tweener conversation. I don't know if I left something behind. If I did, Tej, bring me back to it on the Netflix thing. But L said regarding, so he's one who said the audience is ready for tweener. Rose depth is key. Then he added, your team is always there, about the sports analogy. A wrestler may not be. The Bears are always a face down the street every week. Wrestlers are not. It's a bad analogy. No, it's not. Think about it this way. The Raw babyface roster is your home team. And like your home team, for me, with the Timberwolves, for instance, with Kevin Garnett in the 90s. Now it's Anthony Edwards, Rudy Gobert, whatever. Like, the people wearing the uniform change, just like the people wearing the proverbial babyface uniform on Raw change. But they're still your home team. And WWE it's different in that it's not a team sport. But my point is you're a pro wrestling fan and your home team are the babyfaces. That's where the analogy holds up. Al added, but we are cheering. You can cheer for a heel to do the right thing because they have shown signs. They might disappoint us, but the shades of gray is just as fun. I think it's fun too. I want to stipulate to that, and I feel like I have to say that 6 times for it to register with everybody. I think it would be really fun to watch. I do think it would be bad for business. I think there's the vast audience that was drawing right now do not want to cheer for a heel who's a dick last week, but makes a good point this week. So, okay, let me watch HBO and Netflix 13 episode series that takes 1.5 years to make. For that's not what this is. Stop trying to be something else. It's pro wrestling. It's a live audience experience where you go apeshit cheering and booing, and that's what's fun. Don't complicate this. Let's see. L added, Roman is as a pushed hardcore babyface failed. Roman in a tweener role had grown an audience. He wasn't a tweener. He was a heel, and now he's a face. And he was pushed as a hardcore babyface in a completely obliviously miscast way. And Vince McMahon wanted him to be something he wasn't. To use your words, Al Archer, bad analogy. Not every wrestler fits an exact same mold. And Roman, obviously, we talked about it every week for years, was going to be a great heel. And he was a heel, not a tweener, and he was a great heel. And we'll see if he can be a great babyface. But his natural, at that point of his career with what he had accomplished, superstar of the year. Yeah, he's the corporate guy getting pushed who can't cut a babyface promo and doesn't care about the fans and can't pretend he does. He was an awful babyface. He failed.
Yeah, right now, Roman has never been a tweener in my opinion. He was not a tweener. The closest he came was right when he came back at SummerSlam 2024, and in that case, he was at that point a babyface with a lot of baggage from his heel days, and in this administration, said baggage is not ignored, so you get some tweener reactions. To me, that's not exactly the same as like fully being a tweener. Here's where I am going to for Al. Al, I got your back, my friend, just in this.
The chat room does.
The concept. So. Hey, look, Al, it's you and me against the world, buddy. But look, when you talk about sports teams, the objective never changes. Each team wants to win the prize and wants to win the game. Wrestlers do not have singular objectives. For better or for worse, they are characters. And those characters, especially, I know wrestling isn't peak TV, it's not HBO, but it's catering to an audience that has been informed by peak TV, and the appetite, the awareness for shades of gray is a little bit higher than it has been in the past. And you can lean into that a little bit more than just cheering and booing, because you're not cheering and booing for broad archetypes anymore. You're cheering and booing for three-dimensional characters, and there's always going to be a little bit of leeway. Now, do I think that everyone should just be a tweener and everyone should get mixed reactions every single week? Absolutely not, because then, like you said, Wade, it waters down the product, and, call a spade a spade. It's going to be less accessible to people, and business is going to go down. But I do think that where Al's coming from, I understand the meaning behind what Al said in that post. There is a more complex dynamic than I want the same thing you want, boom. And I think that, at this point, WWE audiences expect that.
So I think having somebody, and that's why the word tweener, it's sort of triggering and full of baggage. I just think maybe we all want to move away from it, because sometimes the term that we use leads to a lack of openness to mutually understand what the other person is saying and embrace something that we actually agree with. One thing that I'm very okay with is a character on a journey. And I talk about that. I started talking about that, 10 years ago. Like that to me, what I enjoy wrestling matches and moves and personalities and all. But I think the thing that I'm most like, because of my job, or just maybe just if I was just a fan and it wasn't my job, it's wrestlers on a journey. Like, watch Bret Hart go from a jobber prelim guy at house shows who just losing openers to in a tag team with Jim Neidhart. And it's like, hey, this guy's pretty good. And it's a cool contrast with Neidhart. And then he became Intercontinental Champion, excellence of execution, had a little bit of an ego that kind of showed up, that kind of leaked through the veneer of the nice guy, laid back demeanor. And you're like, this guy's taking himself seriously. I'm going to. And then the Hulk Hogan steroid scandal happened. They need somebody safe and whatever. So that was a really fun journey. And King of the Ring as a tournament originally was sort of like, it's a way to elevate somebody. It's signaling the audience, this person is ready for a push. And I mean, the most famous was going to be Triple H, and then it turned out to be Austin, because Triple H was part of the current call and had to pay the price and be the Jack Perry scapegoat, although he didn't drive around in a shuttle bus for a year. So
that bus is awesome, though. I won't hear any slander about that bus's design. That bus is so cool.
On that we can agree. So let me wind back to I'm trying to remember what my larger crescendo was to all that lead up. I am fine with there being a wrestler on a journey who would fit people's definition of tweener. What I don't want is an official X number of wrestlers who are consistently, for a long stretch of time, only contextually cheered or booed because their constitution is this shades of gray dream world that wrestling fans think they want, that I think they'll end up watching less wrestling if it's on, or they'll be part of crowds that are smaller if they stick with it. But
I agree with.
Can a wrestler be on a journey that makes it sort of, you're not sure how you feel about him? And is there 1 or 2 or 0 at any given time on Raw or SmackDown? Yeah, I'm cool with that. But it should be part of a journey. It shouldn't be a permanent landing place. It should be an elevator ride. You're going from one floor to another. He's on an elevator. He's going to be on a different floor. Maybe he just stays on it and lands on the same floor when this whole, like, quote, tweener journey's over. So, yeah. And that's what I'm curious about with Gunther. And it's a bunch of things going on. I want to get into Seth Punk in a moment, too. One note from Sadler V3. To support Wade's point, the best part tonight was a New Day segment. That's wrestling, true heel heat. And when you're live at an arena, the best part of the night is when the fans are booing a heel and cheering a babyface. The best part of the night is not, this is awesome. It's not a bad part of the night. That means you're probably watching a good match and the fans want to get the tables. It's not the best part of the night unless you're super into hardcore matches. Best part of the night is when you pull those emotions out of fans. You're telling a story. Fans are into the character and they care about what's going to happen. They're not getting out their scorecards and saying this is a 5-star match. they're emotionally wrapped up in it. And New Day was part of it. I love New Day showing up at the arena and wanting to fist bump the backstage workers and the backstage workers turning away. Some people might have missed that because it's part of the normal carry your bags into the arena thing that I think some people tune out. But it was great setting this week for New Day. Backstage workers loved the 10 years of saying, hey, Kofi, hey, Xavier. And this time they just turned away. They couldn't look him in the eye. That was Xavier. And then Kofi tried to fist bump Otis and Natalya. They wouldn't have it either. So I love that. And then they come to the ring and they want to explain themselves. Crowd's booing. And they're like, screw it. We're done with you. Other than yelling off mic, what did we do? We didn't do anything. So Tej, I want to get your take on what they did with New Day this week. And, punting a little bit. I think some people I'm guessing some people might be mad. Like, hey, I want to hear from New Day. I want to hear their explanation. But I thought this was great. They're petulant and just can't handle that they were booed. And so they're going to throw a tantrum and leave.
I absolutely love this because it's a twist on an old school heel trick of just like, well, you know what? I'm not going to say anything if you're not going to give me the respect I deserve. And they walk away. But it comes from it felt like it came from such a more honest place where these are two men who genuinely feel like they did the right thing by lashing out emotionally, because that's what it was. And we've all been there, we've all kind of said something we regret in the heat of the moment, but we don't want to take it back straight away because we're like, well, yeah, I meant it in the moment and there's a reason why. So to see Kofi and Xavier kind of highlight that specific emotion of just like, yeah, we didn't do anything wrong. This is why we did what we did. I think it sets up what their characters are going to be moving forward, which is not strictly vicious heels, right? We're not going to see New Day kind of starting to brutalize their opponents or, engage in traditional heel heat. I do think we'll see them try and attempt the babyface shtick a little while longer, but the crowd reaction is going to continue driving them more and more up the wall in the way that, original babyface Kurt Angle kind of did on his Attitude Era debut before the crowds firmly rejected him, and then he finally let loose and he was like, well, screw all of you and blah blah blah, and then we got the, of course, legendary heel persona. And I think that will eventually lead into their next set of feuds, because we've started to see how the roster perceives them, and then at one point we all know those confrontations will boil over into physicality and we're off to the races. But I love the fact that okay, they gave us a really solid base for what a heel New Day will be and how they'll develop, and they did it without even saying anything, which is really, really interesting, because now the first words of the heel New Day can be milked for another week.
Totally, yes. So they aired the video package, and I like watching those after a major angle, because what you get is the edited, cleaned up, here's what we really want you to be thinking about edit. Did they exclude anything? Did they emphasize anything? Nothing jumped out to me in this, but I was watching going, did they think they missed a little bit on something, or did they want to emphasize something? What I came away watching the video recap was how great the performances were. And I said it last week, even when I was critiquing, even criticizing the angle, I just thought the performances were great. I mean, Big E being crestfallen and like, what, guys? And then going into hug Kofi, and Kofi put his hand up. I mean, just executed brilliantly. I think that and I focused on it. I wasn't trying to type a recap of it. I was studying Kofi listening to Big E, or excuse me, Xavier listening to Big E, and kind of coming to the realization, now you want to do this? You could see him coming to that conclusion as Big E was talking. Kofi it took him longer to process it, but he eventually sided with Xavier, and then they kind of looked at each other. And so I thought the video package did a good job in a obviously a concise, curated amount of time, conveying the journey speaking of journeys, that journey that Xavier went on and Kofi went on and Big E went on. All that said, so I want to get your thoughts on what that angle beyond what they did tonight, Tej. Especially, what do you think of my continued criticism of this, which is, I think what Kofi and Xavier said about each other was too heated, too personal. It went places that are hard to forgive, because this nice guy, Big E, comes out and you realize he got injured. And remember, 10 years of Kofi and Xavier being really good guys. Power positivity. They weren't tweeners. They weren't complex characters who we cheered because they were like these good guys. And we're supposed to believe that they got on each other's nerves and said horrible things about each other for weeks and weeks and weeks. And it got the worst the week before. But because something completely not new, which is Big E can't wrestle, he's not cleared, but he finally showed up after last week, which was the worst week Kofi and Xavier had in terms of bickering. It really went to the next level. He then comes out because he realizes we're on the brink here of something terrible. And then Xavier, we're supposed to believe he thinks, where were you all along? Well, my answer is he didn't need to be anywhere all along because you guys were doing great and you were happy. Last week, it looked like you needed him because you did. And now you're going to suddenly switch from hating Kofi to hating Big E for doing something completely logical. I just don't believe that's an action of the Xavier that I've watched for the last 10 years or the last 2 years. I mean, like, I don't buy that. I thought they pivoted too quickly from that, and I still do. I'm not saying it was a late call or an audible, but it just didn't ring true that they would go from saying such deeply personal things to each other to Big E coming out very logically the week that he did, as opposed to 3 weeks ago, 3 months ago, or a year and a half ago. And then suddenly they're going to snap and be okay with each other and hate him. I'm still not buying it. Performance is great. Where we're going from here is great. I wish they told the story better leading to that moment last week. Where were you last week? Where are you now, Tej?
For me, it rode the edge between being plausible and feeling like a swerve for the sake of being a swerve. And here's where I'm coming from. It's very easy for anyone in real life or worked or otherwise when it feels like their past primes are behind them. And that's what a lot of, Kofi and Xavier's arguments were about. Kofi lost the WWE Championship to Brock Lesnar in 6 seconds and hasn't challenged for it since. Woods hasn't won a singles championship despite being on WWE for as long as he has. And when you have to contend with your own legacy as a failure, it can be a very, very hard internal conversation. And that's something that you saw Kofi and Xavier. They didn't want to really do that internal work. They kept blaming each other for what was going on. Mm-hmm. Right when that was about to boil over, you get Big E come back and he said, I'm going to help you. I'm going to fix this. Boom. Easy external target. No, you know why this happened? Everything went downhill. Our last 2 years were awful because you weren't there. You were the change, not us. And, when it's really, really easy to lash out at that external figure. I think that's what they were going for. And
I agree.
If the New Day continues to fail, then I think that's where the angle's going. Execution-wise, I agree. It feels like they're leaning a lot more on the shoot love of Big E to carry the angle through. Mm-hmm. There were no hints that Big E was returning on programming outside of, if you were a diehard fan, you saw him on pre-show panels and, you were listening to his interviews, his shoot interviews saying like, oh, I'm feeling better. I can walk around, and spurring fan speculation. Could he come back one day? I think that, just even a single sit down interview, kind of getting the status or like putting Big E on commentary, imbuing him into the programming subtly in some backstage role over the past couple of months, it would have set it up a lot better because right now, they almost did their work a little too well. Of sudden external target, let's blame that, to the point where it now feels implausible given how long the three of them have been best friends in kayfabe. So I agree with you on that.
Standard Deviation was with me last week. I felt like we're in the minority. A lot of people were defending this and pushing back against my criticism. He says it still doesn't make sense. It still doesn't make any sense. I want to emphasize that. For Kofi, the nicest character since John Cena, to suddenly say, you broke your neck, so what? They turned sharply in a way where I was like, what? Like, this is, now you're arbitrarily becoming mean, careless, thoughtless, heartless heel. That's not a natural, that's not a journey. That's a jarring hack turn. That was the one line that really felt like, all right, now we got to get some heat right here before the big. That didn't feel very realistic, and that's why I think the dialogue really kind of let them down on that one specific moment. And to me, this angle had a lot of time invested in it, and it's like the weakest link in a chain cliche or saying. To me, the chain isn't. You don't go, well, all the other links were strong, and then there's this sort of weak one, and then this really weak one. But it's still a strong chain because it broke. like the chain gave. Like, to me, that was kind of a moment, and I was like, man, I don't trust them now. Like, I just, like, a storyline wise, I don't trust them. If Kofi's instinct was, I'm going to go hardcore heel on Big E because Big E saw what we did last week and said that's logically the point at which I need to interject myself and try to bring these guys together. Kofi, nicest guy ever. Easily, I completely sympathize with somebody finding Xavier, sort of intolerable. And so I didn't even hold it against him, because I just, from trombone playing to whatever. I mean, it's just I think he's going to be a good heel. I'll just put it nicely there. So I didn't buy it, but point made. Let me throw a few chat room comments in here. Derek Mitchell said what Kofi and Xavier said to each other reminded me like another NBA analogy. Draymond Green calling Kevin Durant the B word, and it fractured their relationship and the Golden State Warriors. I already got Sandy Ovation's comment there. Junaid says, it felt a little sudden and even cartoonish to a degree that suddenly no one wanted to fist bump New Day and gave them the cold shoulder when they spoke their hearts last week with their grievances. Junaid, I say this every once in a while with you. I really strongly disagree with you. They were mean to Big E. Big E is beloved. You can speak your heart all you want, but if speaking your heart does not immune you to me having an emotional reaction that says you're a jerk. A lot of people can speak their heart and absolutely be a jerk, and they should be reacted to like they're jerks. And New Day were jerks last week to Big E. Whatever criticism we have of the angle and the pacing of it, Big E, this beloved guy, we saw that tonight. Junaid, come on. We're not going to, no matter what they do, as long as you speak, CM Punk thinks this in real life. As long as I speak my truth, no one should be mad at me. Well, no, sometimes you're unapologetic, unwavering overreaction to little things that you can't let go, that you blow out of proportion and turn into a much bigger problem than it would have been if you just relaxed a little bit and moved on, and didn't have to settle every single score with a hard shove to the chest when all it was just a weird look. That's my criticism of Punk handling controversies. Even when I'm on his side, I end up against the way that he reacts to when I'm on his side. So, no, Junaid. Tej, anything you want to say there?
No, I'm completely with you on that one, Wade. I think in terms of this angle, that might have been the most successful part of this week's New Day segments was especially their interaction with Cody saying you two ought to be ashamed because of just the reputation that Big E has built up and how they're unashamedly, going against him, being rude to him and rebuffing him. It's like leaving a puppy out in the rain is what it feels like. You're always going to be seen as the cold-hearted one if you do that. Doesn't matter how right you are in that situation.
Yeah, doesn't matter if the puppy chewed up your swallow. I don't know, whatever. Doesn't matter what they did. I'm trying to think of what they could do.
That felt like a personal story. All right, we'll talk about that later.
Yes. Derek Mitchell says everyone thinks they are the hero of their own story, but I love the crowd reaction tonight for New Day. It built anticipation for what can happen next. I agree with that. And Junaid, back to him. New Day got Roman Reigns post WrestleMania 33 heat, but despite liking last week, I kind of had issues with Kofi, especially switching his personality in a week. Plus, I would have fist bumped them. Well, you can cheer the person who leaves a puppy in the rain too, Junaid, but you're still wrong, and we think less of you for it. Come on, Big E. They were mean to Big E, and he didn't do anything wrong. Junaid, come on. And L. Archer added, New Day has bumped Dom as most hated with fans, and I love it. Well, Dom's a whole other story. I don't know what's going. We'll hopefully get into him. And let's see. Darrell said New Day playing like they weren't wrong for what they did fit into the whole WWE thing for these heels like KO and Drew, etc. Yep. It's an effective character, for sure. And let's see. Derek says, I like Big E's girlfriend, Chris Yim, responding the New Day online and kayfabe for what they said and did to Big E on WWE Raw. Did you see that, Tej?
I did, yeah. I honestly did not know that Big E was... I had no idea that Big E was dating Chris Yim, but I do love when we get some kayfabe or kayfabe adjacent comments on social media because, even though we know it's not real, it adds to the immersion to believe that these kayfabe characters are just going about their days when there's no cameras on them or they're further from a ring. Just seeing Big E, Chris, and Mia Yim at Thanksgiving just commiserating is just a very funny image. But I love those little details. I love those little details.
Yep. Sadler responds to Junaid. Big E's one of the most beloved guys on the roster. It's believable that people backstage gave them the cold shoulder. Al Archer says, a Big E can't go. This is a bit cruel to tease a crowd like this. The Rumble will explode if he's back. I mean, even if he can't come back, I mean, it's a piece. It's a playing piece on the board that you can play, even if ultimately you can't take bumps and wrestle. But I don't. It is true. Fans will be disappointed, and WWE has to be careful about that. They don't want everything New Day doing being fans thinking, well, none of this matters until they get to Big E. So it was a risk they took. But Derek Mitchell adds, what endeared Miss Elizabeth to fans, including was, in addition to her physical beauty, was how Macho Man treated Miss Elizabeth. The New Day is going to catch the wrath of the live audience for how they treated Big E. No question about that. And Junaid says, I agree Big E is beloved, and I agree people should be upset at New Day, but my point is there should have at least been a few wrestlers who had individual reactions, at least talk them out of it rather than ignoring. Yeah, I mean, it was a small sample size.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah. I was going to say, Junaid, I'm with you on that one. I'm very curious to see how heels, or as much as Wade hates the word, tweeners.
I don't hate the word. I just think there's a better word. Don't fair enough.
Tej, we're not going to start this narrative of you hate the word. I know. Yeah.
No. Sorry, real quick. I hate the word hate. I think it's overused, and I think it should be saved for very special occasions. And I want to be very clear. Tweener is not a word I hate. There's very few things I hate, but I think there's better words. And Linda Butler chimed in and said, I had to pop in to say that salty Wade is the best Wade. Go ahead, Tej.
I'm very curious to see how heels or less pure baby faces, because what did we get? We got Alpha Academy, Natalia, and Cody, some of the most pure, good-hearted people on the roster, and we saw their reactions. I do think that was by design. Yeah, Otis. Yeah. Everybody loves Otis. Yeah. When we get, New Day interacting with a Kevin Owens, a Drew McIntyre, even a CM Punk, I'm curious to see how those reactions change, because either, if we get a heel agreeing with the babyface and be like, you guys are wrong for that, then it only increases the New Day's heat because everyone disagrees with that, because everybody loves Big E. If we get a heel agreeing with them, that starts a new story. So there's a lot of interesting possibilities they could go down with, like how do other people on the roster react? And I think Junaid is right on the money with that. Like that could be really, really interesting.
Derek Mitchell pulling from history. We can rely on Derek for that. Magnum TA couldn't come back after his car accident and was used in a physical angle with Tully Blanchard and Dusty Rhodes, which resulted in Dusty being suspended and introducing the Midnight Rider. So I know people are pointing out Big E said he's not cleared yet. And I mean, that they could have said last week, Big E could have said, I'm not cleared. I don't think I ever will be. And it sucks. But he hasn't formally announced his retirement. He might genuinely be holding out hope. It's also possible they've kept it quiet and he is cleared for some sort of physical action. And I mean, I don't know. But my impression was his return wasn't imminent. I mean, but I don't know that, that was just my impression. So I just think I guess my thing is WWE should be careful if Big E isn't able to go somewhat soon in the next few months. They got to take that in consideration. Be cognizant of fan expectations and hopes that he gets involved at some point. I don't know if they want to see Big E managing the Motor City Machine Guns against Kofi and Xavier. I mean, maybe that's where they're heading. It's just him at ringside for a different team, but they should be careful with that. Let's anything else? Tej, I know earlier you brought up that in wrestling, not every wrestler, I made a mental to bring this up, that every wrestler isn't just going for titles, whereas in a sporting event, with my analogy, all the players are going for titles. And when you said that, I'm like, that is true to an extent, although I've watched enough sports to see players with their own agendas. Draymond Green has frustrated the heck out of Steph Curry over the years because he's got his own personal agenda that gets in the way of winning. So I do think there are exceptions to that in sports. And I don't want my analogy of wrestling draws the most when it's, playing to the same emotions the NHL does to be a perfect analogy that holds up to every aspect of wrestling and pro sports that are different. I think the predominant point still holds that there's a reason there are home teams and that they don't travel to neutral sites. And if you do too many characters that are not in a short 3 to 6 week transition period from one thing to another, or teasing it and then reverting back for some other purpose, if you just decide we're going to be more sophisticated, then I think you're basically turning your show into too much of a neutral site game. And so regardless of going after championships or grudge feuds or whatever, I still think that holds up.
That I completely agree with.
Yeah. So let's shift to Seth and Punk. I mean, easily could have led with this, and we might still be talking about it if we did. Part of not leading with it is I didn't want to get too carried away with it and not talk about, New Day and Gunther and the triple threat. I want to go to a couple email comments on this. And I want to start with JB from Detroit, who says the CM Punk backstage sit-down interview with Jackie Redmond was incredibly lacking in compelling content and was delivered in a very monotone way by Punk. I also felt as though Jackie Redmond's humor and enthusiasm was painfully forced, and I've liked her since she started with WWE. Drew and Seth seem to have some similar valid grievances against both Bloodlines and Punk. Is there any way that the two align in the near future as a dynamic heel duo, perhaps against Sammy and Punk? I'll go to Chris Johnson, who talked about this. I love the shoot-style sit-down interview with Punk. It was fresh. Can't be screaming at each other in the ring from now until they have a match. And strong Drew McIntyre video package. And it is hard to take Seth seriously in that outfit. Interesting moment when the crowd chanted CM Punk. It seemed to rattle him for a moment. So just some things to throw out there. Welcome the chat room to chime in on this too. Tej, I'll be open-ended with it. We'll start with Punk. What do you think of the Punk sit-down promo? What was your reaction to it? What do you think of the purpose and the execution of that purpose?
I think, like the chat, I definitely noticed the style of the interview and how laid back it was. And it left an impression on me because you don't see many instances of WWE underplaying a moment like that. And of course, I began thinking, what does this serve? And I think it serves Punk's attitude towards Seth as a whole. He's disaffected. He is not threatened by Seth. He does not care about what Seth has to say. He wants to move on. It reads like, a warrior smacking a flea off his shoulder, right? And I think that was by design, right? It was backstage. It was away from the ring. It was, it was nobody's business but his. He didn't want to address it. He was just like, all right, this is not real. It's not a real conflict. In comparison, you get a much more old school promo in the middle of the ring, right? Emphatically pro wrestling. Seth, he's doing the very passionate delivery, screaming at the top of his lungs, addressing the camera, the entire crowd behind him absolutely going nuts, which, it says a lot about how over Seth Rollins still is when this crowd, which was on the quieter side for WWE at this point, really absolutely came alive when Seth came out. And I think that dichotomy was very much by design, and it plays into Seth's undoing in this feud could be his anger and his tendency to take everything personally, his resentment, whereas Punk's undoing could be he underestimates Seth Rollins, he almost looks down on him, he's condescending, and he doesn't care. And I think the execution of that was done very, very well. Now, in terms of did I like the kind of more calm backstage style interview? I personally did, but that's because I like my WWE a little more sports-esque, similar to the UFC, and it felt fresh and new and a little closer to that. But for me, your mileage may vary when it comes to if you like that tone or not. What about you, Wade?
Yeah, so I like it. I think a sit-down interview should at times feel like a sit-down interview. CM Punk's persona, his character, so to speak, is a plain-spoken every man who you could imagine being at the Blackhawks game. He gets cheered, but you kind of know you probably shouldn't approach him at a restaurant for an autograph because he's going to be upset. Like, leave me the F alone. I'm not on the clock and I'm eating. Are you an idiot? Like you would have no problem telling you off but if you can imagine Kofi being, oh man, can you come back after I finish eating and being nice about it? You don't think Punk's being that way. But people love Punk because he kind of stood for something, or even more so against something back in the day. And also because I just think the number one word that comes to mind when I think about him is unapologetic. And I said that last week, and I thought tonight's interview backed that up. He is unapologetic. Seth came out and goes, hey, you know why I'm mad at Punk? Because when he left WWE, we all thought we were his friends. And then instantly, because he had a problem with WWE, we became the enemy if we didn't leave with him. We didn't have the same problem he had. We weren't physically breaking down. We weren't mentally breaking down. We were happy enough with our money. We didn't think we had to be a WrestleMania main eventer to be validated as people. You know, like that's basically what Seth is saying. And it's like, yeah, okay. I mean, Punk did include that in his calm sit-down interview. I see Punk's calmness as a tactic, which when he says Seth, I don't think about Seth. What I hear is I think about Seth all the time, and I would be embarrassed to admit it. And so I'm going to put on this veneer of not caring about Seth. That's what I hear when Punk says he doesn't think about Seth, because we know a lot about Punk, and he can't let anything go. He can't let anything go. So when he says, oh, Seth, you're obsessed with me, but I don't think about you, I have no problem with that being something Punk's character says, because I think it's believable he would say it. I don't believe it for a second. And I frankly don't think we as viewers are supposed to really believe it. I don't know if Punk's in on that, but I don't think WWE, I don't think Paul Levesque thinks it's really important that fans believe Punk doesn't think about Seth. I just think they realize Punk would say he doesn't think about Seth and say it unapologetically. He would say it, you know, just with a straight face. So to me, that's why Punk's so interesting, because I think he really, really, really cares what people think about him in certain ways, and also really, really, really doesn't want people to think he cares what they think about him. And it leads to a constantly tortured, conflicted person who's putting on a veneer of being calm when there's crazy stuff going on inside in his head behind that calm veneer. And that's why I like this promo, because it just totally fits. I'm totally calm. In his head, he's not. Off camera, he's not. But he, as a tactic, as a self-preservation technique, the veneer of calm is part of the CM Punk brand. There's some psychoanalysis here, it sounds like, but I'm just looking at everything that's public with him. I mean, I just think it's everything I'm saying is just self-evidently true. And I think Seth knows it. And so getting to the other point that one of the emailers said, when Seth's standing in the ring and he's getting a CM Punk chant again, I love that the camera's zooming in on him, because there is something real going on here. Seth, that is legit. Seth, I remember Seth and other wrestlers were like, CM Punk has cut us all off. And is it like, dude, like, we were all there for each other. You got a problem with Vince. You got a problem with the doctor. You got a problem with corporate. But we're brothers. Like, we travel the road. Like, why did you cut us all off? And they, like, there was legitimate, like, people were crestfallen. They were hurt. They were frustrated. And I think Seth was the epitome of that at that time. So Seth is speaking his truth, and he's trying to convey that to the audience. And what's really fun about this for me and for a show like this, don't know if it's best for business or not, but we'll see. You know, I mean, but I don't think it's bad for it if it's kind of the one thing that they're doing. I just think they're doing too much of this kind of thing all at once. It's like, you know, pick your own adventure in terms of who you're siding with. But I think they both are being given the freedom, kind of like Cena and Rock were, where Cena took Rock to school and Dwayne hasn't recovered since then, I would argue. But he came in super confident. I'm The Rock. I'm Dwayne. I'm the best promo ever. And Cena just completely, I thought, just smashed him in their build. I think they're just sort of letting them go at it. And I think Punk and Seth are both confident that their story will win people over. And so it is interesting watching Seth, I think, genuinely standing out there, scripted, improvised, a mix, trying to win over the fan base, not to get to boo Punk. I don't think he's trying to sabotage Punk, but I think he wants to get a 70-30 split. And I think Punk's going for a 70-30 split himself. And I think it makes for compelling TV because they are pulling from reality. And Seth got the second word this week. Punk spoke first. And Seth is right. Punk said his version. He pulled out some truth, focused on that, trying to distract from this other truth. And Seth delivered this other truth. So I thought it was super compelling television, following both of their careers from the start. I mean, I was around Punk in the ROH day shooting ringside photos, and he called me a pencil neck geek on commentary one time when he's like, oh, there's Wade Keller at pencil neck geek, sure, or something like that. It might have been, I think it was the Freddie Blassie line. And he and I have similar long necks, so it felt like projection to me, but whatever. But
no comment.
But we were interactive after the show, and everything's fine. So I knew him back when he was wrestling in front of 150 people at Armories, and obviously followed Seth from very early on in his work. So it's fun watching these two who are similarly driven people with healthy egos that sometimes cross it unhealthy, go at it and have the freedom to, I think, entertain the audience. And to me, they're both speaking what is their genuine truth. So I found it super compelling. I don't know where the audiences are going to land. I think Punk is a shinier, newer toy, despite being older because he was gone for so long. and Seth has had a bit of a struggle finding his character and all that. But I do think Seth sort of feels like, I think I've earned this audience's more positive reaction to Punk, and I think he's working hard to get it. So that's kind of my take on things, Tej. Your reaction to any of that?
I mean, I'm very much in line in that it is hard to say who the audience at large will root for, because like you said, Punk is the shinier, the new toy. Diehard fans remember him as the crown jewel during one of WWE's most dead periods in the modern day. But at the same time, he walked away. And for those of us that, followed his exploits outside WWE, you got to see a less untouchable Phil Brooks / CM Punk. And that baggage is still there, as much as we don't want it to be, when he came back to WWE. Meanwhile, Seth Rollins, and everyone has said it, work or shoot, is very much like the ultimate bench player turned main eventer. The man has been there week in, week out for over a decade at this point, and he's earned his equity with the WWE audience. He got a huge pop when he said, "I'm main evented WrestleMania," because he earned that spot. And it, to the point where he's almost crossed into living legend territory, despite being nowhere near an elder statesman quite yet, in that, he's done so much and people love him so much that, he has earned those cheers even when he is a heel. And that's why it was so hard to keep him heel as long as they did. So it's tough for me. I'm torn between who I want to succeed at the end of the day, both in and out of kayfabe. But I loved both versions of the interview. I thought they both made very, very solid points.
Yeah.
And if and when they do get face to face next week, or on the road to the Royal Rumble, I'm curious to see what approach Paul Levesque takes with this. If there will be a concerned attempt to paint one of them as the villain or the antagonist and one is the protagonist, or will they genuinely just be two clashes forcing? I'm curious.
And I don't think that there's a master plan. I think they are open to steering. I think the headlights are not on high beam right now, like on a foggy day. I think they only see so far ahead, and they're just steering week to week. And I think they're both trying to make their case, and whoever the audience sides with might dictate kind of how they steer things going forward. Then that might lead to some embellishments and some leaning into some things. Maybe Seth snaps at the fans or cracks or gets a little judgmental of them, not, siding with him. And that turns him a little bit more heel. It can also kind of have a different approach, which is the fans going, "Oh, shoot, we actually like Seth and we've hurt his feelings." And not like in a mocking way, "Oh, we hurt his feelings." Like we hurt his feelings. Like, he's been working hard for us. He's the top guy. And now, we are kind of siding with Punk, but what Seth is saying makes sense. And by the way, when Punk left, I was speaking out pretty strongly against like Jim Ross going, "Oh, Punk's leaving money on the table." And it's like, he's got money. He's got more money than 98% of people are going to have the second he walked out of WWE. And if he handles his money well, he was broken physically and mentally and needed a break. And people said, "Oh, but he's leaving money on the table." Like, are you paying any attention to where he is at a breaking point mentally and physically? So I totally sided with Punk on stepping away. He didn't owe the fans anything. He owed himself some peace and some distance and some time to heal and grieve and be upset and vent and all that. Seth Rollins probably should have given him that space. Like, okay, Punk didn't get back to me. Well, this is a pretty big deal, walking away from your career at a peak moment, taking on the behemoth that is WWE and Vince McMahon. He might not know who to trust. He might think anything I say is being recorded or is going to get back to somebody else. I understand Seth's emotions, but my sort of like processing of it based on what I know, which is not everything, because you don't know everything, about the nature of their relationship and how close they were and all that. But I sort of am like, Seth, just let him have some space. Like, go live your life. He lives his. He's not literally your brother. He doesn't owe you money. Like, give him 3 months and then check in again and be okay with him not immediately filling you in on everything and crying on your shoulder. Like, he didn't choose you to be that person. It's okay. So the fact that he's still carrying that grudge, I'm kind of with Punk on it, but I sort of wish Punk would just say what I just said. And he hasn't. Like, I want Punk to push back and go, Seth, you're mad I ghosted you. I didn't know who to trust. My head was in a bad place. I wouldn't walk away from what I walked away from if it wasn't. But now that gets into a realm that Punk hasn't shown, which is public expression of introspection. Yeah. And that's not a category that Punk excels in. So that's what's so fascinating about this. We've seen these people in real life not grow up technically, but, be in so many situations.
Become the fullest version of themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I get that Punk isn't going to be introspective. And I think Punk thinks if he shows weakness, the dam breaks. And so he won't. And so that's what's so fascinating about this. There's truth in it. They're riding it out. It's a foggy day. The headlights don't go more than 12 feet before the car. And we don't know where the next curve in the road is going to be, but they know it makes for compelling television. And I think it's worth leaning into this because I don't think Seth Rollins is a reason we're having a boom period. And I don't think CM Punk is as much of a difference maker as he could have been some days, as much as he's all over social media and all that. I don't think to me, don't mess with Cody. Like, do shades of gray with Cody right now. Like, ride that out. But to me, like, Seth and Punk are actually most compelling when they're embroiled in some sort of controversy that's based in reality. Not all characters, not all wrestling personas are. They are. So this is a pretty cool situation to lean into. And I won't call it the exception to the rule. I think it's an exception that proves the rule. Like, wait for it to be really compelling and good and lean into it, but don't go hunting for it and manufacture it if it gets in the way of something else that you'd be better off doing.
Absolutely. But one thing that I wanted to kind of take note of what you said in terms of de-emphasizing the master plan aspect of this feud. And this might be jumping a little further into another rivalry, but when Sami Zayn came out, he said one line that really caught my attention, which was, when you fight CM Punk, you become the worst version of yourself. That seemed like a very specific line to throw in there if that wasn't going to be a major theme of this feud. Do you think this is leading, if not to a Seth Rollins heel turn? I think I'm blanking on who it was. I apologize. Asked about the possibility of a Drew McIntyre and Seth Rollins alliance in the future. Yeah. Do you think that if this isn't leading to at least a heel turn, do you think that this feud was put together with the intention of allowing Seth Rollins to get a little bit of a darker edge?
I will go back to a previous answer because I think it applies here, but I think I need to say that I don't think they have a master plan. So I think they're open to it. My answer is I think they're open to that, but I don't think they're set on it. You don't know how Punk and Seth are going to come across until they do this. So it would almost be like presumptuous and arrogant to be like, oh, I know exactly when Punk speaks his mind and Seth speaks his mind for 2 months. We know where the fans are going to be, and we know what we want where we want Seth and Punk to lean. They obviously I think they have more of an end game in mind for Punk right now in terms of what's going on with the favor. Punk's like, I'm not going to talk about that yet. And Roman and Heyman, I think they definitely have something that they're, circled on the calendar. So I don't think they want to do anything that interferes with that. And I don't think they think it would be fair to go to Seth and say, we need you to pull back on the truth because it's landing too well, kind of like what happened with Drew and Punk. We want you to pull back because it's actually landing with the audience. It's turning them prematurely against Punk. I don't think they want to do that, but I think they probably would if suddenly Punk started showing, a prickliness that was off-putting, like happened in AEW, and Seth was doing too well. I think they would actually say, Seth, you're doing great. You win. But we're not gonna let you win on TV. But privately, you just won. Fans are on your side. Now we got to steer them against you a little bit. I could see that happening. I don't think they've ruled anything out or in. I mean, other than they know what they want to do with Punk, and they don't want this Seth Punk thing, no matter how compelling it is, to get in the way of the end game with him. Some chat room comments as we've been talking here. Derek Mitchell says Seth Rollins might be WWE's version of Dwayne Wade, the number 3 pick in the 2003 draft. Not LeBron, not Melo, but turned himself into a main event level performer for almost 10 years after Punk's departure. I think it's a great analogy. I like NBA analogies. I think that works. Seth can only hope for a better statue. And Chris Johnson says it's who Punk is to me. When I think of Punk, I don't think about in-ring first. I think of press conference Punk. They gave us a version of press conference Punk. But I don't think that was a version that had any like nefarious ulterior motive. Like, I don't think, let's put Punk on there with Jackie Redmond and he's going to be so unapologetic and sort of arrogant and talk down to Seth in a way that's going to get the crowd to turn him. I don't think that's the case, but if the goal is for Punk to be a heel against Roman, they might not be upset by it if he sort of ends up going into that territory that often Punk does, because there's something about his unapologeticness that comes across as sort of, prickly and off-putting eventually. And so they might know what they're doing with him when it comes to that. Derek Mitchell said, I think Jackie and CM Punk have some chemistry with the shared love for the NHL. I didn't mind the segment. It is just a beat to the Seth and Punk story. Tej, anything to add to that? And then I'll read some more comments.
Only that, I do agree with a lot of the comments that are coming in. I think that this was a stylistic choice that was meant to be a counterpoint to Seth Rollins' interview. I don't think that the higher-ups at WWE are saying, this should be a parallel to when he was on the MMA Hour, structure it the same. I don't think that anyone's thinking about it that deeply, but I do think that putting Punk in this environment, allowing him to exist as this more laid-back, disaffected version of himself was, done very much on purpose to signify his implicit thoughts towards Seth.
And I'll go back to, I'm not alone. I mean, I know this. I'm not alone in believing that Punk finds it very important to convey how unimportant he thinks certain things are that are important to him are. And people can rely on that.
It's a shield. It's a defense.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's a defense mechanism for him is, I don't care. I don't think about it. And they know, they believe. I mean, who knows? Who knows? But they believe, as I do, that there are things he says he doesn't care about that he cares about, and it is a shield, and it's a veneer. Now, it doesn't mean that's the case with Seth. Like Seth and Punk, for all we know, and I haven't heard this either way, might have talked everything out, and they're going out for drinks in a back room, or not, hanging out in the back room afterwards, laughing about it and going, hey, I'll say this, and then you say that, and we'll see what happens. And then Seth goes to Punk, might be right now talking to him going, yeah, what'd you think of my dewy, sad puppy eyes when the crowd is chanting CM Punk? Punk's like, that's great. Let's not get too sure that something that feels like a shoot isn't a work based on a shoot. Take some of the fun out of it if we know too much. And I don't think that's the case, but we don't know it's not the case. So as we psychoanalyze body language and think it's a window into their real soul, it also could be, they could be playing us. And I always stay somewhat humble, in that regard, with this type of thing too.
It's the best example of a work that leans into a few shoot elements without going too far. It doesn't, heavily rely on insider knowledge. It spells out everything that you need to know. Mm-hmm. But the fact that we can have this conversation and the chat's not laughing at us is a testament to like how, well these two segments were put together this week.
Yes. These are two people with histories because of Seth on social media and other interviews he's done, and so much of Punk's meltdowns and fallings out and what people have said about him. There's a lot of meat on the bone, so to speak, for each of them, and there's a lot of real stuff that they can play up, and I think it is largely real. I think when Cena tore into Rock, there was a lot of reality there, and I think, yeah. So I mean, as I have a little caveat, maybe they're all laughing about, hey, we tricked everyone to thinking we really feel this way. Don't be the person who thinks everything is always a work and there's never any truth to it either. Like sometimes it's not a work and sometimes they just say, let's play it up. I think Drew McIntyre felt a lot of things he said about Punk were true, but I also think a very good mix of them were things he doesn't sincerely believe, but made for a better story. And I think it was a mix of both. And I think that's always the case with Punk. And what's remarkable and awesome about Punk right now is by all accounts, he's cool with it. I don't want to say it's a sense of humor about everything that went on, because I still think it's it's too soon and maybe never will he have a sense of humor. But he understands it's out there and it's in play, and knows he's got to go along with it, and he is. I mean, like I think he's okay with it. He's not showing signs if he's not, because he's in a professional atmosphere, and I think he does sincerely believe if people bring up real things from his past, as long as they, there's a couple places you don't go, with anybody, but he understands it's for business. It isn't mismanagement of a Walmart. I mean, this is anything that they bring up that's real. I think he's really, really smart guy. He's going to say, you know what? I wish that weren't part of my truth if he thinks that way, but what we're saying is good for money. And I think that's what happened with Drew too. Doesn't mean some nights he didn't go, God, Drew said it a little too well, like that hit close to home. But you know what? It's to draw, and ultimately, I'm in good hands. Al Archer says Punk's coming off losing the promo war in the Drew feud. Don't know if everybody agrees with that, but I thought Drew had some better. I think Drew had more good weeks than Punk in that feud, but Punk had some good ones too. And then speaking of Seth's main gripe, JC Scooby 1976 says Punk didn't owe wrestlers either when he walked away. And Jason D from Australia says Punk's comeback to Seth could be, I didn't get back to a lot of people. It's not like I only choose not to get back to you. And so if Punk responds, I mean, and like I said, I kind of hope he does. I think Punk should just go, Seth, you've let this eat you up inside forever, but ask around if anyone's willing to talk to you. You can take a little dig like that. If anyone trusts you,
it's not all about you, Seth. Yeah.
It's not all about you. And it wasn't all about you then. We weren't the besties like you portray. You were a nice guy. We were professional colleagues, but you're blown out of proportion how close we were. But he can be mean and go, I know you didn't have a lot of friends. So you thought I was your best friend, but there were 10 people I like better than you. That doesn't serve Punk's character well to say that. It might be true. It might ring true, but I don't think it's the best thing to say, because in the end, you want to preserve Seth and Punk to some degree, and I think they both have that in mind. Rude Dog says, I'm pretty sure CM Punk's lawyers at the time told him not to talk to anyone in WWE. I'm sure Seth would go, right, but I'm your friend. We can have a private talk. You could trust me. I don't think Punk was in the trusting business. Sadler version 3 says, I think Punk big timing Seth is part of his mental tactic to piss Seth off even more. If I didn't bother Seth, I don't think Punk would act like. If it didn't bother Seth, I don't think Punk would act like that. It's interesting the way that Seth talks. They're going back to Seth being a 16-year-old who wanted Punk to train him. Seth didn't really get into the free, not free thing. I thought he was going to rebut that. But it's clear that Seth looked up to Punk and then now doesn't. And Punk is saying, I don't think about you a lot. You're not a champion. I'm going after championships. I mean, so yeah, that's enough to work with. That feels true. Regarding their promos, Jason D says there should be a code amongst wrestlers that is, don't say anything in front of an audience that you haven't said to me face-to-face privately. It's an interesting comment. I think there are things that if you hear it on TV and you're a wrestler and someone says it about you, you'd be like, I think they think that's true. And I'm kind of glad they didn't needlessly bring that up in a personal situation, but I can understand saying it now to make money. Like, not everybody would have that rule, but there's things that people might say about me, and if it's going to make a lot of money, I'd be like, okay, they really feel that way, but I kind of am glad they didn't decide to just bring it up to me otherwise, because what was the point? But now that there's money to be made, now I get it. So I don't know that I agree with Jason. What do you think about that, Tej? I mean, I think if you think you're going into some personal territory, like, oh, you're falling out with your brother and your mom and your best friend all happened in a short period of time because X, Y, and Z, and no one knows any of that stuff, and you bring it up, well, yeah, I mean, of course, you should check with them first before you go there. But once something's public, then if you amplify it on TV, I still think you should probably clear it with them.
I mean, for me, and, I say this as someone who has, not been privy to a lot of secrets in the business, and I'm very aware of that. But for me, it feels like, it all depends on how much faith you have and how good the other person is at their job. CM Punk and AEW, it felt like a lot of his gripes were at comments made that were way more innocuous than what Drew and Seth are doing. But it's because, if I remember correctly, it was a lot of like, at that point, I lost faith in his ability to be professional, which I don't think he has in the WWE system. And that's where I think it leans. I feel like Punk lost trust in real life with almost every establishment. I think that did carry into AEW after a while. I think in WWE, he knows that everyone at the end of the day is able to do their job and steer the audience back where they want them, and it's all in service of that. So I think that's why he feels safe at this point. Like, I don't know the man personally like you do, but that's what it feels like. Just seeing the programming and seeing Punk's, supposed real life reputation at WWE during the second run being, trouble free.
Obviously, Seth could say, Punk, you've been a model citizen since you came back, but how much work is that for you? And how much longer can that really last? And really, but I actually don't think management would want him saying that, because I think they're really hoping it's not difficult for Punk and it will last. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to put something out there as inevitable and almost will it into existence or suggest it into existence. So I think there's already places that they're not going, but it also would extinguish some of the heat in this if Seth said, Punk, you've matured a lot and you've earned my respect because you've been nothing but a professional when you came back. I mean, that's probably how Seth really feels. Like, you're taking some of the sting out of my criticism of you, because it looks like how you acted in AEW was very specific to those circumstances. And the circumstances here are, as I touted long before you returned, much more professional. And and now you're not getting triggered, and now you're a model employee. I mean, there's things he could say that are true, that I think are true, that wouldn't serve the storyline. So we can see they're only saying things that are serving the storyline right now, that feel real and personal, but aren't going too far. And that's a fun zone to be in, as if you're a viewer watching it, to see two people in that. Standard Deviation said Corey Gray said Punk ghosted him too after thinking they were best friends. So yeah, Seth wasn't alone, and it's interesting now if Corey Gray's comments on this. It's just not really on his something he's sitting around live on TV with at the moment. Junaid says Punk called himself the voice of the voiceless. Maybe that was just his character, but if he honestly believed this in real life, he didn't he owe people in the locker room? I mean, I can have opinions, but I don't know that I want to say with any certitude from on the outside looking in what he owed or didn't owe people. I just want to suggest it's possible, and it should cross Seth's mind if it hasn't, that maybe Punk needed space. That is not to exonerate Punk. Maybe the dynamic and relationship with Punk and Graves and Seth was such where, geez, Punk, trust us. Your lawyers might say that, but, at least touch base and give me some line of communication that just says, I love you. I hope you'll understand, but I need some space right now. And I think that's what Graves and Seth were probably looking for. And so I don't want to project onto them that they were looking for Punk to just speak freely about everything going on and put himself at legal risk. I think they just wanted some acknowledgement that they are people who are worried about him, and he hears them and they're getting back to him. And it sounds like that didn't happen. So in that sense, I'm on Seth's side, but we don't want to project onto that also that Seth is demanding more, or Graves was demanding more, or anyone else demanding more than that. And so I don't know. I mean, I'm talking myself into siding a little bit more with Seth than I was earlier in the show, which is a testament to how this is complicated and nuanced and very personal, makes for good TV, but we shouldn't pretend to know enough to really take a strong side with certitude. Derek Mitchell said CM Punk has been sonning Seth Rollins in the story like a big brother talking down to a little brother. What do you think of that, Tej? That big brother, little brother
the big
dynamic.
Bro,
yeah.
I think it's become a trademark of the CM Punk promo since his return of, you don't know what's really going on, kid. Like, I've been around longer than you. I've seen this business from more sides than you ever have and ever will. Yeah. And it works so well because heel or face, that delivery is just so eminently hateable that it gives his opponent so much ammunition to continue getting riled up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fascinating because in a lot of ways, if you're trying to put Punk as the face, you wouldn't give him that much kind of condescension, but it works because the CM Punk character is so aware of his opponent's weaknesses that you could read into it as like, oh, he's purposely not showing them respect because he's trying to take them off their game. And that's what's so genius about what the Punk character has evolved into now is you can get away with dynamics you ordinarily couldn't because he's established himself as a master manipulator.
Yes. I'm going to read through Chris more bullet points from Chris Johnson's email that'll get us into some categories we haven't covered yet as we kind of get to the final section here of the show. We're well past the hour and a half mark. And there's certainly some things we can still talk about that we haven't. I do want to just note that we are encouraging you to support us with a VIP membership. And I'll sneak in a quick plug here. PWTorch.com/GoVIP is our main website that tells you all the options, but you can, if you're a Spotify user, you're listening to us on Spotify, you can search right now PWTorch VIP and get a 7-day free trial in Spotify's partnership with Patreon. And that'll get you a membership. We got 3 different tiers with different features and levels of benefits, including just simple ad-free versions of the free shows that you're enjoying right now. And that's a good way to show support for us. You can go to Patreon if you're part of the Patreon ecosystem, patreon.com/PWTorchVIP. You don't have to be part of Spotify to support us through Patreon and get some benefits. But the main way to get an overview of everything we offer with a full VIP membership, which unlocks 35 plus years of newsletter and audio archives, hundreds of retro radio shows from the 90s, years of my shows on KFAN radio with big name guests in a live call-in format in the early 90s, and over 20 years of podcasts, 20 years of post-pay-per-view roundtables, Wade Keller hotlines with backstage news. So many great benefits, including an ad-free version of our free shows and an ad-free version of our website. So you can get all our news and TV reports and features and exclusive content. A lot of great benefits. Check out the details. PWTorch.com/GoVIP. Okay. Back to Chris's email. Solid opening segment from Gunther and the fellas. Not happy for another triple threat, but it's better than another Gunther Priest match. That Priest has no chance to win. Okay, the final testament against the Wyatt 6 is off to a flat start with the crowd. I personally have no investment in this. I love spooky gimmicks, but this is missing something. Just let Bo Dallas wrestle with no mask, maybe. I don't know. So tell me what you think about the Wyatt 6. I mean, it comes across. I use it. It felt like they just kind of ran out of steam with the gimmick. They were sort of creatively abandoned. We saw them as a group finally, and Nikki Cross is self-evident what she is, but Gacy, they've done very little to build his character. Dexter Lumis, very little to build who he is. They're just extras. And I agree with the no mask thing. So yeah, it feels very, very mid-card. And frankly, within a few weeks, I was saying, if this is mid-card, I'll be okay with it. So I'm not going to complain. But I think you can be mid-card and still tell a little bit more depth of character story. And I do think they should realize by now, Bo Dallas, I think, is talented enough to not need a mask to cover up his facial expressions, and there'd be more of a connection there. What are your thoughts on the state of Wyatt 6 and what they did tonight with them, Tej?
First of all, it definitely felt like Wichita kind of let them down on this one. The crowd was silent for a good portion of this match, and I think it's what happens when you haven't earned the equity with the crowd to be off TV for as long as they have, and then just kind of show up again. Not on Raw, but it works with Shinsuke Nakamura because he's been around for 6-7 years. He's held championships, so his disappearance feels conspicuous. The Wyatt 6, originally I thought that, keeping them as a novelty act that only shows up a couple of months, it would make them feel more targeted. They only came back with people they had a specific agenda towards, but there wasn't really any build-up. There wasn't a huge... It didn't feel like the level of dread they tried to induce to The Miz, who is by far the best part of this angle, because, even when he tags in, he just immediately just runs away terrified of Lumis and Gacy, which is incredible. Real ones remember the never-ending Miz and Dexter Lumis feud from 2022, where Lumis was basically just a serial killer that kept stalking him. But anyway, it feels like they just kind of showed up because there was someone for them to attack, and then immediately they went into this kind of multi-man feud that, Karrion Kross, I think, made a major misstep where his first reaction to The Miz getting taken by the Wyatt 6 was just apathy, and apathy is not a great space to build a multi-man feud off of. I think both of these acts were, teetering over the edge of ambivalence with the audience, and both of them really needed a strong, emphatic win to keep people invested. One of them is going to walk away the loser in this feud, and I think that loser is going to have to do a lot of work to really build back any form of investment.
What do you make of Bo taking the pin? shouldn't he be the fourth out of four options early on in the Wyatt six? Or is it important for him to be the one who Paul Ellering blinded with a toxic substance? Because if you blind Gacy and nobody knows anything about Gacy and they're not invested in him, it's going to sting less, pun intended, watching it than if it's the lead guy, and it gives the lead guy something to talk about. So I can see both sides of it, but I mean, there is a side that says, yeah, you want to focus on Bo Dallas as a central speaking character and leader, but do you really want him taking a fall to a faction that isn't particularly over, no matter what the circumstances? Does that send a signal that defines him down in the eyes of fans?
It definitely is a double-edged sword, because when you make the only real kind of emotional centerpiece Bo Dallas, you kind of make it so the only person that the audience will be invested in taking a fall is Bo Dallas. That
or the only
being
person
said,
who will be just ruined by losing, because anyone who loses because they're so infrequent, they'll be defined as the designated jobber. So you almost have to do both, so you don't have a designated jobber. Yeah. Go ahead. I jumped. Go ahead. Yeah.
But no. That's a much more eloquent way of what I was saying. But at the same time, they haven't built Bo enough as, a fully realized babyface to the point where the audience knows to be sympathetic to him after taking a loss yet.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. Out of kayfabe, we all love Bo Dallas, the person, right? We understand where he's coming from. He wants to carry on Bray's legacy, and the agenda of the Wyatt Six is still an admirable one, but it hasn't been fleshed out enough that we think what WWE wants us to think. It definitely felt like the way the pin lingered, we want us to think, okay, Bo Dallas has failed in his mission to punish The Miz for turning on R-Truth. And that did not come across. We do not have any sympathy for Bo Dallas because the presentation of the Wyatt Six has leaned more on the spookiness and the macabre rather than, their somewhat pure at heart agenda.
Right. Yeah, they hit those notes, but yeah, the presentation, the presentation is overwhelming it. Yeah. Strong Drew McIntyre video package. What do you think of Drew framing? I mean, he's such a good heel because he gets what being a heel is, which is, I took a beating and I lost because of a severe loss of blood. Like, not because Punk was tougher, just lost a lot of blood, which, by the way, is an effect of getting beat up. You lose blood. So, but he's framing it as less of a big deal because, I just lost a lot of blood. So, sort of like, I went to battle, I went to war, and I didn't lose. I just lost blood. So trying to soften what Punk did, reframe it as best he can without just lying in a bold-faced lie to people. And then he's like, and I could have come back on Raw right away, but my family needed me. Like, I love that too. He's like, I could have come back right away, but I didn't, only because I had to be there for my family. So now he's baby-facing himself. I was there for my family. I thought it was good stuff. So yeah, what stood out to you?
I love the fact that he's emphasizing, fighting spirit and the warrior. He's doing everything that a provider should do, a warrior. He still has an honorable, pure heart, and that's the reason why we haven't seen him after his loss. And, if he was a little more weaselly, the audience would think, like, were you just tucking away with your tail between your legs and blah, 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 writing that line. But I absolutely loved heel Drew's delivery. I think Drew McIntyre's continues to top himself in terms of character work in 2024, and I'm so excited to see where he's at come Mania season, because it's starting to feel like more and more people are beginning to agree with him in terms of having a gripe at people's reaction to the Bloodlines babyface turn, the original Bloodlines babyface turn. Curious to see where he fits into a landscape that has a Seth Rollins and a Kevin Owens already in it. But, it was I was curious to see how they were going to rationalize him moving away from Punk when his entire agenda was just Punk for so long. They did so as cleanly as they possibly could, like, at least Punk got a bribe. Sami Zayn was there by his own choice. That's a pretty, credit. That's a pretty logical frame of thought. And, moving on to Sami as, Drew's next target, it makes sense. They've always had incredible chemistry together, and throwing this on Saturday night's main event, it's a bit of a rushed build, but, the two have had history in 2023 in their current character bases. And, a cheeky little grudge match on a pay-per-view or a primetime special never hurt anybody. So I'm into it.
I loved. I will say, I'm intrigued with the fact that Drew is injecting himself into this the bloodline drama. But the thing I loved is a line. At least Punk took a bribe, like for a favor. It's just like, it's fun getting Drew articulately and thoughtfully and introspectively, by the way. He's like, he's talking about his thought process. I thought, can people change, and do they change? And then you get this window into his mind, which is, well, Punk took a bribe. So in my way of looking at the world, I get him standing next to Roman for a bribe, but Sammy, Jay, and Jimmy, Roman snapped his finger, and then they're his lackeys again. You can see his version of the world, which is, if you stand to benefit by standing by somebody you don't respect because of a bribe or something, sure, but he looks down at people and finds them pathetic if they just want to be followers, because Drew, if he's anything, it's not a follower. So I don't know where this goes, but he absolutely put himself in the dialogue, in the conversation of the Bloodline saga. And so I'm curious if there's a bigger end game to this, or it's just because of Sammy. It's just sort of something he had to talk about, and he had to frame Sammy in that way. But it's interesting. And Standard Deviation said, what do you think, in the chat right now? What do you think is Drew's place on the WrestleMania card? I don't know. I don't even know if he's going to be a priority or if he's going to go leftover. I hope he's so good right now. I mean, he's so good right now, and in his prime. He's the same age as Roman, but I think he wants to do more. He's got a desire to accomplish more than I think Roman does. I think Roman, I shouldn't guess, but I think Roman's willing to walk away and be very much a part-time guy. And I think Drew's still excited to be a week-to-week player and build more of a legacy for himself. So I hope he's a priority, but I don't know that he will, because there's a lot of top names right now who obviously are on the forefront of Levesque's mind. Any thoughts on that, Tej?
I think Drew, more than really anyone else, his spot at WrestleMania is really going to be defined by the fallout of the transfer window, because there's a lot of people that Drew has had a gripe with for a long time that he has not been able to address that are on SmackDown. Solo Sikoa, Jimmy Uso, Roman Reigns, Cody Rhodes. And a lot of those people are top guys at this point, and so is Drew. So I think when Drew and his next kind of target become forced into each other's orbit via, someone crossing over to the other brand, you've immediately got a new dynamic to work off of. You've got a feud that you can carry all the way through Mania. If I believe the transfer window carries like into January, coinciding with the first episode of Raw on Netflix, and Drew's feuds in 2024 have been very promo heavy. You need a considerable amount of screen time to do that over a few months. So if I had to hedge my bets, I would say that we get a Drew McIntyre confrontation with someone, a new arrival to the Raw brand, on the first episode of Raw on Netflix, and then that kickstarts his feud to WrestleMania. That's my hunch.
Yeah. Sadler Version 3 says, by the way, stealing the term transfer window from soccer is a great move. LOL. I mean, because I report. Oh, go ahead, Tej.
I was going to say, I've noticed a few more blatant sports-esque presentations, especially, preceding Survivor Series. They had the football kind of introductions of, I'm Roman Reigns, I'm from X University, and I'm this.
Did not like. I like it as an idea. Just the heel bloodline shouldn't be going, oh, you need us in the studio to help promote a show. Like, it totally breaks their character. It's non-wrestling people thinking something's cute. I don't like the Netflix thing. You can't fake this either. I mean, there's some non-wrestling people who I think are pitching ideas and people are saying yes to them who should be saying no to them. But it doesn't disprove your point in any way. But
yeah, it reminded me of the Key and Peele sketches of the nonsensical names saying I'm from this university, and especially for the heel bloodline, it should not be reminding me of that. But another example is in the fallout of Survivor Series saying Jimmy Uso's out with a toe, and this is where it happened. Bronson Reed's out indefinitely. The kind of like rundown of an injury list. Yeah. It made everything feel like a proper league, which was a very strong choice that I've just noticed more and more, and this was another example of that.
Yeah. I think
funny,
Sadler V3 says, yeah, those intros were corny. I'm fine with corniness. Like if Otis and Chad Gable want to do NFL style, like I'm from this university and this is, that's fine. But the heel bloodline should be like, get that phone call and either not return it or like be like, you're kidding, right? That's not, we don't show up to do cutesy promo work to help the brand. We're the freaking bloodline. So yeah, I thought that was character damaging for them to participate in that. Okay, back to Chris Johnson's email. Another heel taking maybe too real a shot at Cody. This time Xavier with a line like he was a good guy in high school. It was blunted. I heard him say something about high schools. My audio mix just didn't pick up exactly what he said. Tej, have you picked up on people saying things about Cody that feel like they ring a little more true in a dangerous way that the audience might pick up on? That's been something that's been part of the conversation the past couple of weeks a little bit.
I mean, I felt like that line itself was just a little more innocuous than I think people are reading into it for, because chat, please correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there like some kind of shoot story that I think it was either Xavier or Cody stole the other's girl in high school or something like that, because they actually like went to the same high school. It felt like that was just a quick little Easter egg for the hardcore fans at that point, because it was such a throwaway line that Wade, you had issues for a split second and you missed it. In concept, I think Cody at this point is so bulletproof that you can take a couple more pot shots at him and it won't really affect his character. But I do think that they do have to be careful of, kind of damaging Cody's shtick, because he is such a pure-hearted babyface.
And vulnerable, and the crowds, he has a history of a crowd turning on him 5 years ago. They chose Aleister Black, Malachi Black over him. And then he solved racism and had a gender reveal party and felt sort of oblivious to his ostentatiousness that was out of step with he made some, I think he's learned from them, and I think he's in good hands in WWE. I think people know what his strengths are, know what his weaknesses are in WWE, and there's a sense of authority and sophistication to the way that they market him to, and it doesn't matter if Cody's self-aware or not. He's being steered in a respectful way that has worked so far. But there's a vulnerability with him when left to his own devices to screw up and take things a little too far. And that's why I don't think there'll be a ton of shots at him wearing suits, but there's been just enough that we're seeing him in suits less often. And because, the psychoanalysis of Cody for me is I don't know that he knows exactly how he always comes across. And I think sometimes it feels manufactured and deliberate and planned, not because it's natural, but because he thinks it's the way to get to a certain outcome. And I think that phony is overstating it, but I think some people see it as kind of a phony guy who's just trying to be something and just lighten up and be yourself. And so because of his history, I think they need to be careful with people taking shots at him. And I don't think we'll see a lot of them until there's a purpose to it. But some people find it a little irresistible because Cody's Cody. And there is some material there. Okay, Derek Mitchell in the chat said, Cody and Xavier attended rival high schools in Georgia.
Gotcha. Thank you, Derek.
Yep. JC Scooby wants me to weigh in on something he said, and I don't know what it is that... Sorry, restate your question if I didn't chime in on something. I might punt, but at least I want to overtly punt if I don't have an answer for you. Anyway, all right. Lots of big matches Saturday. Now Drew and Sammy, quick builds, but big matchups. Yeah, big picture thoughts. Tej, what do you think of Saturday's main event?
I mean, Saturday night's main event, I think I said it the very first time I was on this podcast, it's possibly my favorite piece of wrestling media of all time. I absolutely love, the old school retro 80s style of it's Saturday night's main event. I love the idea of, it not necessarily having a big build because it is just a TV special. That's what Saturday night's main event used to be. It was, a bigger punctuation on the road to WrestleMania or SummerSlam or what the big pay-per-views were at the time, but it was a step above TV show. So kind of giving it a somewhat, not thrown together, but you know what I mean, relying on faster builds or builds that kind of come out of nowhere. It adds to the feel of Saturday night's main event and its original purpose to me. It makes the vibe feel different somehow, and I'm all for it. Jesse Ventura coming back, which, the mark in me was like jumping up and down on my bed like a child. I absolutely love Jesse Ventura. So I am beyond excited to watch Saturday night's main event. Both the first one, and I believe they announced a second one in January.
Yep. Yeah, it's a fast
Following Royal
turnaround.
Rumble season. Yeah,
Yeah,
because
really fast
isn't
turnaround.
has it been confirmed how many of these they're doing per year? I think the rumor was 4, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
the rumor's 4, but this, I mean, maybe they're just squeezing one in December, and then they're going to space them out, January, May, September, December next year. I don't know.
December. Yeah.
Yeah. Read, I recommend Tom Hauser's book on Jesse Ventura's governorship of Minnesota. If you're in the mood to become less of a fan of Jesse, you'll want to read that. He was quite the politician. Let's see. And I wonder how Jesse will be on commentary. I hope he keeps up with the product, says Sadler version 3. Yeah, for sure. Jesse, when he went to WCW, I mean, he frustrated Jim Ross and people in WCW because he's like, I'm Jesse. I'll react to the product, but research, doing, but I mean, a lot of people felt that way about WCW. It just wasn't as polished. But yeah, I'm hoping he doesn't just embarrass himself. I don't embarrass himself for it, but seem like he's only doing shtick and doesn't bring product knowledge. I think Pat McAfee, set a standard. Logan Paul set a standard. Like, you could be an outsider and come in and show you're a super fan. And I hope that Jesse, he isn't just winging it in a way that sort of everyone's just sort of wincing, going, ugh, Jesse's not good anymore.
Yeah, because the Jesse Ventura shtick and what made him stand out even from other heel commentators is that, yes, he sided with the heel, but he never took it too far to the point where it felt like he was in on his own joke. He genuinely felt like someone playing devil's advocate. And the example I always give people is WrestleMania 3, Steamboat versus Savage. All the moments where he's like, that was 3. That wasn't 2.5. That was 3. He's counting slower. It's just plausible enough that you could buy into it. I'm curious to see if he can deliver his opinions with the same level of specificity, because to do that wouldn't be, in order to do that, you'd have to be very, very updated on the programming. And I don't know if Ventura has been updated on the programming. I'd like to think he did because he seems like a consummate professional, but time will tell.
Yeah. Derek Mitchell says, I wasn't a fan of Jesse's racial overtones when referring to Coco Beware as Buckwheat and Tito Santana as Chico Santana. I mean, Jesse wasn't that far removed at that time from Chico and the Man being a popular sitcom on a broadcast network TV, and Eddie Murphy doing a takeoff on Buckwheat and stuff. I mean, it was, I'm not defending it in 2024 standards, but if you live through it in real time, the context of the moment made people go, but not cancel him. Like, Derek, I'm not saying you had to be a fan of it by any means, but like, he wasn't trying to be, he wasn't like being racist in a way that racists are overt racists are racist. He was just kind of, it was the moment in time in pop culture. It was sort of felt like it was in bounds, but on the verge of not being. So it's, I don't think Jesse should be proud of it, but I'm, stepping carefully and just saying at the time, it doesn't, I think it feels more, I think indisputably it feels more jarring now than it did then, even if then some of us were saying, maybe go a different direction on that. So I'm defending him and not defending him at the same time. In a way, I'm just trying to put context on it, because everybody lives through their era in real time, and we're hopefully progressing forward on these things. And WWE had worse things that they did than that, but it was not inconsistent. What do you think, Tej?
I think, just knowing Jesse Ventura's command over an audience, I think he said those things knowing exactly what response they would garner at the time. And I think he is aware that saying those specific things would not garner the same response today. They would garner a much harsher response.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is where, like, has he still got it? We'll see. But I think he knows that, there's a difference nowadays between heel heat and straight up racism, whereas back in the 80s, I don't think there was. I do agree with you, Derek. Just looking back on it as a person of color, born in 2000, it does not sit right with me, and I did not get the same reaction I think the live audience did in the 80s. I just went, ugh, but we'll see if he's still got it.
Yeah. Standard Deviation said comments like that weren't a sign of underlying racism at the time. It's a non-issue. It was a flippancy towards things that were insensitive and what's a word? Not forwarding racist things, but sort of enabling or mainstreaming things that we should have been moving away from. But I think standard deviation's right. It wasn't as like I know Jesse. I hung out with Jesse at the KFA and Christmas party, and we talked for hours. And he was my phone buddy when he was reading a book on libertarianism, and it just like woke up his political juices. And we'd talk on the phone for a long time. Oh, wait, I just read this, and what do you think of that? I don't know. I mean, so I know Jesse like better than most people who have just watched him. I don't never ever got any sense that there's like genuine racism in him, and I think so. Jared Lynch is surprised. Tej born in 2000. Why is that surprising? You look like a guy in your mid-20s. I mean, give or take. Doesn't seem shocking to me.
I'm gonna assume, Jared, you think it's because I look way younger than that, and I'm gonna say thank you.
I think 24 is a good age to look. 24, 25.
100%.
Yeah. I mean, do you want to look 14 when you're 25? Do you want to look 40 when you're 25? Just embrace it.
Oh my God. See, what I've noticed, Wade, is I feel like 25 is the age when people start wanting to look younger than they are rather than older.
Huh. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, that's just what I've come across. Again, though, I live in LA, which is, known for looking at what's on the inside and not on the outside. So I could be looking at a biased sample. But
that's from my I've never lived in LA, but the Jeff Lewis podcast is like, it's just crazy how like the superficial obsession with appearance, and it's like, is that like just celebrities and rich people, or is that like everybody in LA? It's quite the thing. All right, let's see here. Oh, okay. This is nice. I don't think you look any older. It's the deep voice and the maturity that throws me off. So he thinks you bring wisdom and intellect and more worldliness to someone in your mid-20s. There we go.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
He thought you were a very young 37-year-old with the wisdom you were showing in your commentary. I don't know. I don't want to speak.
I'm like the Outrunners. No, I'm kidding.
Okay. Back to Chris Johnson's email here, which we're drawing out. We should end soon here. I like the finish to the rematch. She looked like she was actually hurt at the end, but she is great at selling injuries, so who knows? Looking forward to Saturday. So the show did its job. Let me go to JB's email. I'm not really sure what Damian Priest has done to deserve a third shot against Gunther for the title, but I understand why he was necessary to add to the match. I'm not really sure that Finn versus Gunther works as a one-on-one match because both guys are currently acting heels who the crowd will inevitably get behind. To put them against each other without a true buffer face like Priest would be asking a lot of the crowd to make a decision, one way or the other, that might be hard to alter fans' feelings on for the future, depending on what path they want to take. Any thoughts on that, Tej?
I mean, I think we pretty much covered it earlier. I think the idea of you can't ask me to talk and then put comments about my age in the
your
corner.
age. Yeah,
sorry.
That's not fair. Sadler version 3 says, I thought he was late 20s, early 30s. So anyway,
I'm 24. I guess that's still mid 20s, but yeah.
I thought you're 25. So you look older than you are by a few months.
Oh, thanks.
I didn't think anything. I'm joking. Of course, there's no difference between 24 and 25.
Oh my God. So coming back to what we were talking about earlier, I don't think there's really much left to add other than I'm very curious to see where all parties go from here because it doesn't feel like there's a lot of mileage left in the feud after this. What are your thoughts on that? Yeah.
I'm like excited to see everybody move on. I'm ready for that. This is a spirit of Saturday Night's Main Event, by the way. Saturday Night's Main Event was after we make all our money at the house shows with our big matches. That's when we're going to put them on national TV because we're done selling tickets, and now we'll give it away for free on national TV. And if that's a spirit of SNMEs, fine. I mean, not everybody's going. Well, there aren't even house shows. I mean, it's a very different world, so it doesn't apply perfectly to 40 years ago. But in general, Saturday Night's Main Events were matches that were well spent, and everyone had already they made their money on it. Now let's just give it away for free on TV, and that's kind of what this match feels like. I can't help but notice that Liv still seems to be overtly flirty to Finn at times. I'm curious if this is leading anywhere, as they seem to plant seeds that Liv and Finn may be in cahoots as far back as when Dom and Judgment Day originally turned on Rhea. I hadn't thought about that in a while. Have you picked up on that, Tej? Liv and Balor being flirty, and where do you think the Dom thing is going, by the way, just in general, with him, reacting to Finn taking a dig at him?
I think it's as implausible as this may have seemed a year or two ago, I think it is leading to a Dom face turn. But I don't know in what form that will be, if he'll split from the Judgment Day, if the Judgment Day will be in tatters by the time that happens and he'll be off on his own anyway. But I do think eventually, and a lot of this has to do with, out of kayfabe, I think the WWE audience understands how much Dom has improved and that he is a good guy outside of everything. I think that that's starting to bleed into, his heel persona a little bit too much, to the point where, like, we've gotten everything we can out of this. Let's see what this guy can do as a babyface and rocket him to the top. In terms of the flirtiness between Liv and Balor, it's hard to tell what's genuine and what's not with them, because they've both been so opportunistic. And it definitely feels like they're leaning into Finn asserting himself as the leader, despite saying there are no leaders. And, Dominic's clearly not happy with that. We've seen Liv not really be impressed with that, the way she acted this week. She was like, oh, yeah, no, yeah. Finn, give us all the opinions on what we should do. We all want to
Yeah.
listen to Finn. That's how we win. And I was like,
Yeah.
I can feel the sarcasm dripping from her words there. So it feels like that's the underlying theme that's going to take center stage for the Judgment Day in the next couple of months. But again, it could be a swerve. It could be Liv and Finn against the world. Crazier things have happened with this group, and they could find a way to make it work and be consistent. But I'm not sure as of now.
And I don't think Liv is going to be babyface anytime soon, but I think Dom might be. And so that would play into Liv siding with Finn Balor one way or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, back to JB's email. Once again, Heel Drew is back to making good points about the inconsistencies of the babyface's actions. LOL. Drew and Seth seem to have some similar valid grievances against both Bloodlines and Punk. Do they align? Okay, covered that. I've noticed Tessitore and Barrett have been doing the Side of the Night segment the last few weeks on Raw, similar to what ESPN does for College Game Day for football on Saturdays, where Pat McAfee's a weekly panelist. Do you think McAfee and or Lee Fitting have had an influence in creating this segment? Lee Fitting, probably for sure. There's people who are nostalgic for the Attitude Era days when there were a bunch of fan signs, and they are obviously trying to, cajole people into doing that again because they like that energy. I don't think fans sitting behind someone holding up a sign want that. But yeah, fan signs are fun. I mean, when you look at the peak sign era of the late 90s, it there's something missing when you don't see a bunch of people holding up signs. It was kind of part of the fun of the Raw Nitro era, just what are fans holding up? Some of them were good, some of them weren't. I still am amazed at some people not knowing, you can't just draw like thin letters and expect to be read. Like, I mean, come on, people. But anyway. All right. I just have no interest in this women's Intercontinental Championship tournament. They need to do a much better job of making it feel consequential and something to be celebrated. Right now, it feels like throwing random matches on TV to arbitrarily get a belt on someone to fill TV time. And was there a reason tonight's match was a three-way? Every match, JB, has been a three-way because they wanted a bunch of women in the tournament, and they didn't want to do a bigger tournament. So they gave a bunch of opportunities to a bunch of people. I wouldn't read much into it. I mean, they're putting it, Tej, in the spot that is the least important spot on the shows, right before the main event, late in the show, and they just want to get I think they just want to get to the title match and move on. I don't think they're in love with this. By definition, it's why tournaments in theory are nice and in reality are kind of blah, kind of like tweeners, where the crowd doesn't have a big investment because they're random matchups of people who aren't feuding, and it's a mix of personalities without a lot of backstory. So that's what you get.
I completely agree. And I also think that this tournament on Raw really was undone by the success of the Women's U.S. Championship tournament on SmackDown. The U.S. Championship was announced earlier. They got all the hype of, wow, mid-card titles for the women. And they just had, just by the nature of, the SmackDown mid-card for the women's division was bottlenecked with a lot of these kind of intertwined rivalries between wrestlers that didn't really feel plausible to go after a title, the world title. And because of that, they had a lot more, rivalries built into the tournaments that made it feel a lot more engaging. Meanwhile, the Raw mid card hasn't really had that. So a lot of the first round tournaments feel like what they are, just three women thrown together.
Yeah, exactly. I know I'm doing a long show when my dog is getting restless on the floor next to me. Like he's had his nap. He's changed positions 4 times, and now he's looking at me just going, come on. It won't be long. All right. They gave us a lot to talk about. I mean, I don't feel like
They did.
stretching things out here. I feel very little emotion as it relates to Raquel Rodriguez. To me, she just feels like generic, bigger, stronger women's wrestler number 10. She lacks promo ability, charisma, or even being a great technical wrestler. I felt as though the Rhea Raquel main event should have been built to feel bigger than it was throughout the episode, a rare miss by WWE when it comes to building in-show main events. As always, love the show, and everyone go VIP. Thanks, JB. Yeah, so your thoughts on Raquel and your thoughts on the build to the main event, which I agree is kind of lacking. We saw Rhea show up in the building and a little reference to it in one of the group promos, but it didn't seem like they were working hard to give USA Network a big quarter hour number 8 rating this week.
Yeah, it definitely felt like this was a means to an end to get to that iconic shot of Rhea and Io both holding up the title and wanting it for themselves, combined with the fact that, Survivor Series, the Women's War Games match, ended with the two of them celebrating specifically. Definitely felt like that's either a rivalry or a team up that's being teased for the future, which is incredibly exciting because that's a very fresh pair. But Raquel felt like the collateral damage. I think that her healed character has suffered being next to Liv, who is, I don't want to say a better character, but at the very least a bigger, more boisterous character, and that's always going to make Raquel feel in the background. I don't think she's leaned into her powerhouse sensibilities as much as she should have. There should be more disrespect, more brutality, and more just kind of like ramming through people rather than, just being a slightly bigger version of any other wrestler in the women's division. I think that all the tools are there, but I think the execution has just felt a little flat. Mm-hmm. And fans of Raquel from NXT know that she has that fire and she can deliver the promos, but we just haven't seen it on the main roster, and it's a shame.
And I just want Rhea to stay healthy. I don't want to even worry about her getting legit hurt. I'm glad she's back a lot quicker than a lot of I think expectations were with the orbital bone. Tej, anything else you want to add before we sign off here?
I think, honestly, I was skeptical that WWE would be able to retain my hype for early 2025, just given how many events we have in quick succession. Saturday night's main event, Royal Rumble, first Raw on Netflix, the next Saturday night's main event, Elimination Chamber, then WrestleMania. And it feels like, each one of them, they've established their own little selling point. Even Elimination Chamber, which feels like it was destined to be lost in the shuffle, has John Cena's last time in Toronto going for it. And, it's a testament to just how ironed out the WWE schedule is right now, that they can advertise all 5 or 6 of these events. And I know clearly, where conceptually the product is kind of going to be on the road to WrestleMania.
Yep. Okay, I like to do this with a few chat things from earlier in the show that we moved on from. So I'll just read a couple things to wrap up the show. This is a callback to some of our earlier conversations, Tej. Azan said, Gunther is not just a stereotypical heel we are used to seeing in WWE over the last 40 years. Agree with that. Junaid says, another great week for Gunther as Mike work was strong. Despite the what chance, I feel like him attacking Priest was consistent with his recent insecurities, and his words for Balor felt real life. Junaid adds, Wade, this is a predetermined sport. It's not like the NBA. People know it's scripted. Why run from this? If a relative handful of stars are nuanced, you can still have strong reactions in the story. I
think we went over that, right? It's a give and take. It's just you can't go too overboard with it.
Right. And to me, it's the opening line from Junaid. It's a predetermined sport. It's not like the NBA. People know it's scripted. I just want to push back on this, and with Junaid bringing that up, pro wrestling isn't a scripted show. It is a simulation of a sport. So the fact that it's scripted and predetermined isn't a reason to not emulate what it is at the core, which is a simulated sports presentation. So I like Ed Ferrara a lot as a person, and he was a great interview subject, but one time he says, well, now that everyone knows it's fake, we shouldn't pretend it's real. And I don't know if there's ever been a statement that, I'm paraphrasing, but the spirit of his comment, I don't know if I've ever disagreed more. You need to actually work harder to immerse people when there's so much outside the confines of the opening and closing credits of a show that reminds you of how everything is scripted and people break character, talk openly. There's press conferences right after pay-per-views where they practically self-analyze their own booking while inconsistently wrestlers show up in character and out. You need to work harder to make it feel immersive so that it feels real. And it's why actors are trained to be good actors, and sets and great TV shows look real. And I mean, the goal is make everything as immersive and realistic as possible. So when he goes, why run from this? I feel like I'm just on a completely different philosophical planet than Junaid when he says this. The last part of his thing is fine. You can have a relative handful of stars who are nuanced and can still have strong relations. That's fine. I'm like I said, I'm fine with it. It being an exception, not a rule, on occasion, maybe 1 or 2 stars at a time, sometimes 0, by the way. Don't get too wrapped up in always needing it. But you can't have 4 or 5 major segments in a show where it's a bunch of people where you're not sure, you're not being steered clearly towards rooting for or against them. But this idea that it's predetermined and people know it's scripted, so why run from it? Or why run from this? It's like you want to embrace making it as immersively real as possible while having the creative freedom that UFC and the NFL don't have. You get to determine your own outcomes, and the most charismatic person gets to win. That is not the reality of MMA, and which sucks. Sometimes it lines up well, sometimes it doesn't. You end up with boring champions who win. So, I don't know. Yeah, Junaid, I don't know what to say to that. I mean, people know it's not real, but you got to make it immersive and as realistic as you can so people buy into it while you're doing it. You don't want to flaunt that it's not real. Junaid, anything to add to that? Or anything to add to Junaid's commentation?
I think we've gone over it as clearly as we possibly can. I definitely agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. And then Mark F said, I love this. Following this conversation is wild coming from someone who usually cheers for the heels. I mean, that's part of a wrestling fan audience is people who cheer for the heels. I mean, that's just been there. It's been there forever. I mean, there were people in the 70s who were cheering heels. There were, the front row section D in Greensboro, North Carolina got famous for cheering the heels and popping for Ric Flair and all that. I mean, it's part, but the fact that there are exceptions to the rule doesn't mean you should throw the rule out, the structure out that works.
Yeah. That's what makes those moments so much bigger, is that they are exceptions to the rule.
Yeah. And those people are rebelling against their people who cheer for heels would have a lot less fun if everybody was doing what they're doing. Like it's the fact that it's like a contrast die, so you can see things like you're going against. If the company's doing its job, there will be some heel fans, because there won't be heel fans if everyone's cheering the heels, because then people are just promoters doing things wrong and the audience is out of step with the presentation of the characters. So having some heel fans doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It means you're doing it right, because they stand out. By definition, if they stand out, you're doing your job for the vast majority. And then Al Archer just said, I agree, using the term tweener makes us more confusing than it should be. I think we both want the same thing. Junaid, what does everyone think about Punk calling the favor Heyman owes him personal? It's not about a championship or Heyman managing him, or is Punk avoiding addressing it because he's turning heel soon? He talked about having a personal relationship with Heyman. I don't know, but I'd have to rewatch it. Did you take from it the favor is personal and it doesn't reflect opportunities, so to speak, in WWE?
I feel like in this case, it might be just reading a little bit too much into a line that was meant to say, hey, we have not forgotten about this plot point, but we're coming back to it later. Because it would have been really easy to just say, all right, Punk's going off and doing his own thing with Seth. This time at the Bloodline is over. It's like, no, that's still there, and we're coming back to it. But I just need a reason to not bring it up in this specific sit-down interview. So it's like it's personal. It's between me and him. Something tells me that's all that was.
Yeah, I think you're right. Junaid says, people, let's give Wade credit for Shades of Grey views. He's using logic in his arguments, at least, but I still prefer well-done Shades of Grey, given the choice, but both have pros and cons. Chris Johnson says a tweener concept could work if there's no live audience. Watching a live audience sit contemplatively is not great TV. And Ryan Solorio said, welcome, Ryan, says, until he apologizes, Roman is always going to be a heel for me. I love people who have that line, like, you got this box needs to be checked for me to ever cheer you. You need to address this point. Anyway, I think that's good enough. Cool. Junaid, thanks. Fun conversation. Fun doing shows with you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. I said fun doing a show with you, and then you didn't.
You said you said Junaid. You said Junaid again. That's why I thought you said great tit. I thought you were being like great tit for tat.
No, sorry. Okay.
Well, like, you know what? You guys reconciled at the end of this. At the end of this episode, I'm not gonna get in the way.
I was staring at this text that I decided not to read when I said that. I thought it was cool that Testore and Barrett were both justifying WWE's decision to create a women's IC title because it creates opportunities for a deep, talented women's division. And so his name slipped into my comments there. But I decided not to read his text, but I apparently read his name. Tej, thank you. Great doing a show with you. Junaid, also great doing a show with you. I know you can handle it if I come at you kind of hard when I disagree with you. And I appreciate your contributions to the show. And Tej, I'm talking to you now. That was Junaid. I've got this straight now. Great having you on again. It's a blast, and thank you.
Pleasure as always, and thank you all for listening.
Yep. Thanks, everybody, and go VIP. We'd love to have your support, and it's not charity. We're giving you a lot in return. There's a lot we do that you aren't seeing for free on the VIP side of things that I think you'll really enjoy. Just diving into those back issues. If you want to learn about wrestling history, you can binge my run on KFN radio in the early 90s and listen to me talking 35 years ago about wrestling with this, kind of conversation and format. And Jesse Ventura was on the show with me. We did an interview and all kinds of cool big name interviews with that. So pwtorch.com/go VIP and check out our website, pwtorch.com. And please like this show, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, comment below. All that helps us with the YouTube algorithm. Thanks, everybody. And we will talk to you all next time with a flagship tomorrow and then the Dynamite post show on Wednesday.